The first item on our agenda tonight is the approval of minutes as available. I'm not aware of any. Okay, so we have no minutes, so we'll move on to the second item of our agenda, which is CPS and CCRSD. Dr. Hunter.
I'm actually going to have Jared
Okay.
do our presentations. Just a little bit of context. These are the budgets that we brought to the school committee 2 weeks ago.
Dr. Hunter, could I think, just for the home audience.
The home audience, great.
Feel free to, if you'd like to sit up here, we have mics we can pass over.
You want to sit?
Whatever's easiest. I'll stand, that's fine.
Well, you have, you can control it from there. You have a laptop on the podium. I don't know, however you want to do it is fine with us.
We'll stay where we are and
Okay.
talk from here.
Okay.
just
Just
so- yeah.
for clarity, we can't see that, so we're going to have to follow along on the paper version.
Correct.
Okay.
Great. So these are the budgets we presented to the school committee 2 weeks ago. These are the superintendent's recommended budgets as of today. I think you'll see some great work that's been done in the zero-based budgeting process, as well as through our reorganizations and reallocations of funds. We've been able to bring in a very reasonable set of numbers here. You'll see, especially when we get to the regional budget, there's a set of choices for the school committee to consider, and I know that your feedback tonight will be informative to them when they meet tomorrow night to hear your thoughts, especially related to E&D and OPEB. So Jared will talk you all through it. This is definitely a conversation, so ask questions along the way, and we will be happy to entertain them.
I think you all saw it, but I brought copies of the line item budgets for both, as well as the budget presentation. How's that? Good. So I'm going to be talking about a lot of numbers, a lot of information. So I'm going to be reading some things just so you know. But any questions you have, feel free to interrupt me. As Dr. Hunter said, this is more of a conversation, and I welcome it. So I'm going to explain again a little bit about the zero-based budgeting process and what we did for the past 4 or 5 months. So what zero-based budgeting is zero-based budgeting is a method of budgeting in which all expenses must be justified. Zero-based budgeting starts from a zero base, and every function is analyzed for its needs and its costs. During the past 4 months, principals, administrators, department heads, and support staff reviewed the 512 budget lines that was in the FY19 budget and built FY20s from scratch. It was a collaborative effort. It worked because really everybody did buy into it. We were able to consolidate many lines, and FY20's budget was reduced by 72 to 440 lines, and I expect FY20's to be reduced by even more. Some of the highlights of what was reviewed included a 3 to 5 years worth of looking at legal, salaries, which included FTEs, steps, lanes, longevity, stipends, overtime, and substitutes, all contract services, memberships and fees, PD, and all aspects of special education we looked at. We then reviewed supplies and materials, textbooks, equipment, software, and hardware. We continued to take a deeper dive into our contracts for copiers and also cell phones, but we've also identified some redundancies in those areas. We reviewed revenue on our grants, revolving accounts, and our fee structures, and we recently hired a transportation consultant to see if we can do things more efficiently, but more importantly, to do a 10-year sustainable replacement cycle of the buses. So the superintendent's Concord Public Schools recommended budget for FY20 is $39,390,163, which is 2.99% higher than FY19 school committee approved budget. The chart on this slide is by DESI 1000 function. As you can see, I broke it down by FY20's. I broke down FY20's recommended budget and compared it to FY18 school committee budget. FY18's transferred budget, FY18's actuals, the delta between FY18's actuals and FY18's transferred budget, FY19 school committee approved budget, and the difference between FY19's budget and FY20's requested. There are some large drivers, such as instructional leadership, and large reductions, including district leadership and admin and programs with other districts. But it's important to note that on this slide, instructional leadership is going up 3.47% from FY19's budgeted, but it's actually going up 10%, or $2.7 million on FY18 actuals.
Before we move off this slide, could I ask a question?
Please.
So you took the FY18 budget and then you did a transfer exercise to, move things into the DESI, 1,000 function areas, or actually the low-level function areas that you'd like to see them in. Can you just tell us what the relationship between the FY18 transferred budget, FY19 budget, and FY20 requested budget? Are they now all three aligned, or are there still differences?
They are, all three are aligned. They're all by our chart of accounts, our internal system. So last year's FY18's transferred budget was actually done in FY18 by Mr. Flaherty and his staff. Okay. FY19, exact same lines, same DESI function, again was done by Mr. Flaherty and his staff. And then FY20 is our requested budget, exact same lines, exact same chart of accounts, but we did some more consolidations. We looked into, we did a zero base from every single line.
Thank you. So just to clarify why I asked that question, the transferred FY18 column is directly comparable to FY19 and FY20 requested because you're using the same chart against all of those. FY18's original budgeting, things were a little bit mashed up and not in the same, not aligned, and this helps to align everything.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
You just have to remember FY19 was built before the transfers were complete, so if you go across, you're still going to see that FY19 budget have some significant swings to it.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying? Because it was built, the transfers happened all of last year, whereas the budget was built this time last year. So the alignment is cleaned up essentially in actuals of the transferred FY18. It will be cleaned up in the actuals for FY19, which we are actively producing as we speak, and now in the FY20.
Okay, so that it's probably better for us to look at 18 actuals.
Yes.
Actuals reflect the transfers.
Yes.
Okay, they reflect the transfers and they are the actuals. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I'll keep going back actually to a lot of the FY18 actuals, not the FY18 budget.
Fine, thank you.
A couple other things I just want to point out on this slide is other school services is increasing 11.76% in FY20, mainly due to the increase in special ed transportation. We saw a decrease in FY19 transportation costs, but we are expecting it to go up in FY20. We're working with CASE on ways to forecast these large swings. And then the increase in fixed charges is just due to the early retirement incentive, and I'm going to talk about all of these drivers right now. So now I kind of switch gears. So instead of going by DESI function, which will be in the superintendent's budget book, what I did was instead of breaking down DESI's function, I broke them by an expense category. These categories included contingency, contract services, equipment, legal, teacher longevity, teacher stipends, maintenance, membership, overtime, professional development, all the salaries, whether it's admin, teacher, tutor, or clerical, custodial. Other expenses included supplies and materials, textbooks and curriculum, substitutes, utilities, and many more. In all, I created 32 different expense categories for the CPS side, and the drivers on this slide were the biggest ones for FY20 budget. The contract services category is increasing 15.5%, due to a number of reasons. And this would be a common theme throughout. We did, as you know, we did an audit of every single account, and things in the past may have been put in the wrong account, such as in contract services, and we just looked into that and put them in the right accounts. Special education contract services are going up $103,000 due to current and FY20 needs. Again, also the expense type we're charging it to. Maintenance contract services are also increasing $66,000. And lastly, the case transportation costs are going up $113,000. So those combined three large categories roughly add up to the 15% that it's going up in FY20. Employee separation costs are going up 198%, but that's a little misleading. We expect to fill all employees who are taking the incentive at a savings of approximately $30,000. So we budgeted all the vacancies at $75,000 and right in those lines. So there's a savings in the teachers' lines, but the expense out is in the employee separation. And the average salary, give or take, that was going out was about $105,000. So that is the reason for the employee separations costs going up. Also, this is the first year that we budgeted the known retirement incentive costs, and it's the $233,000. And also contractually, we have sick leave buyback. Again, that's contractual, and that's going up $52,000.
We do have a slide that will show you the overall savings for that program, so be sure you see that was effective.
Is the separation that's paid, is that contractual or is that negotiated?
No, that was a one-time option offered at agreement with the school committee.
Okay, and we're going to do, so it was one time before and they're going to take it
There's
this year?
two phases. They could take it last January, they could take it this October, and that's it.
Thank you.
And we'll go over that slide and show you how much we've saved. So the aide salary is going up 11.81%, not necessarily because we hired a lot more aides, unless a tutor's position was doing this function in the past and it made more sense to hire an aide at a reduced cost, but because there were many aides that were being paid out of incorrect accounts, such as the tutor accounts. Therefore, you're going to see an increase in the aides percentage going up, but you're going to see a drastic decrease in the tutors lines. It's important to note that DESE recognizes tutors, aides, and paraprofessionals in the same reporting function. So this was just a housekeeping thing on our end, but we were reporting it to the state correctly. Substitute lines have increased 95% because DESE created a new function for long-term substitutes. Instead of charging a long-term substitute directly to the teacher's line that they're replacing, we created a long-term sub-account for each school. This is not necessarily a cost increase because there were contingencies built into the teacher's salary lines. We're just putting them in the lines themselves so we know exactly how much we're spending on long-term subs. Budgeting long-term subs is a guess, and oftentimes you see savings because the person going out on leave is at a higher step and column than the person that is replacing them. We are currently about to enter contract negotiations with the CTA, but the contract expiring includes a double step raise for every teacher that is not on the top step. For example, if you are currently a Master Step 6 this fiscal year, you will be placed on Master Step 8 to begin FY20. This is contractual. This is a contractual increase. It also does not include cost of living increase. That will be bargained. There is a budgeted increase in these lines for contract services, and we expect there to be parity between the CTA and the CCTA. Teacher salaries account for $22,537,000 of the $39.3 million requested, and also 96% of FY20's recommended increase. The amount budgeted for teachers in FY20 is $2.4 million more than FY18 actuals. Supplies and materials are going up 51%. This is mainly due to the way that we budgeted these items in the past. We consolidated a number of supply, equipment, and even contract service lines. We also bumped up the elementary schools to where they were prior to FY19's budgeted. In fact, the amount requested for supplies and materials is only $111,000 more than was spent in FY18, and that does not include any supply and material expense that may have been spent out of the wrong category. Another big driver is we're doing an everyday math in the elementary schools, and that is driving up these supply lines considerably. That's a big reason for the increase. I think about $90,000, give or take. The amount recommended is more on par with our historical spending. The increase in clerical salary is contractual, but also putting staff in the correct accounts. The increase in maintenance, custodian, and transportation is also contractual, but the increase is also driven by a new FTE, a custodian at the Sanborn, that is needed to keep up with the needs of the building. And overall, as you can see, budget drivers account for $2.6 million of the budget. So we identified the drivers. Now we're going to identify some savings that we found from the zero-based process.
Can I just go back to contract services? So that's going up by $287,000, and I did hear you say the largest part is special education?
Well, there's three big parts. Number one was due to special education going up $103,000. But that's also because of the expense type that we're charging it to. We are, as you know, starting programs at some of the elementary schools in special education. Therefore, trying to keep kids in, bring them back, which is the reason for that. And you're going to see a drastic decrease in tuitions for that very reason. So that's going up $103,000. Case transportation is going up $113,000, and then the maintenance contract services are increasing $66,000.
Okay, I get it now. So what is the maintenance contract services?
So it's basically, what we did was again, the zero-based process. We were spending this amount, maybe out of particularly other lines, and it's just keeping up with the needs of the building. You know, they're green schools. They're under, for the most part, 10 years old. Just some of the things that we have to contract out for basic building needs that we can't do in-house.
Okay, and the new maintenance is mostly, the new maintenance salary is mostly because of one custodian?
That and contractual.
Okay.
Yep.
And just a point of reference, the custodian is the only staff increase we're requesting across both budgets.
I just have a follow-on to that. So the increase in SPED is, why is that contractual versus just teachers? So I assume I would see a growth in
It's
teachers
called a
somewhere.
contract. It's a lot of the same similar language for different purposes. Contract services means we're bringing outside people in under individual types of contracts versus the teacher contract, which is when they're employees.
And a question for you, so on the supplies, the $420,000, can you tell me that again, and how much is related to nap time?
I'm sorry.
Did you say nap time at the schools?
Math.
Math, okay. I was like, I can understand why nap time, supplies.
Yeah,
Okay, math.
it's a software product that they use through all the
That sounds
elementary.
better to me. I was like, nap
It's
time.
a subscription
We got a
software.
little bit of a gift with Everyday Math. The initial purchase of the program 3 years ago was all of the program in its entirety for 3 full years. So we're now having to find a placeholder in the budget so that we can sustain that.
So again, with the supplies and materials, it does look like it's going up $420,000. That's not necessarily the case. It's consolidating.
Right.
We
You
saw
have a
savings.
classification issue? So you have, is it a reclassification between
Exactly
lines?
what
So
it
if you strip out that, so that came up in salary aids and in substitutes, it's in materials as well. So if you strip that out, how much is left of the 2.6 million, do you know? It's not classification related?
Well, I'm going to be going over some savings, and I think I'm not exactly. I'm going to be going over some savings, and then I think it's mostly contractual. But
Okay.
96% of that. This
That's what it seems
request
to me,
is-
yeah.
And everything else is just trying to budget the best we can with the information we have.
Okay, that makes sense to me, thank you.
Yeah.
Can I ask a very unpopular
Wasn't it someone's responsibility to look at a lot of these accounts and determine the accounts being spent the wrong way?
So, we were reporting to DESI correctly. The bottom line always was about zero, and that's the way that it was managed. So, doing a zero-based budget, we were able to identify all of these things. So, the auditors found no wrongdoing, no real expenditures out of the wrong accounts. They don't go in deep of looking at contract services and is there equipment being paid out of that. If there's a $50,000 contract services coming out of equipment, they'd catch that. It was little things, but the bottom line budget was in budget. So now we've identified through the zero-based budget process some cost savings. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm not. So to offset the budget drivers, we identified $1.6 million in cost savings. Over the summer, the district advertised an RFP for a new school committee and special education lawyer. By doing so, the rate went from $1,100 an hour to $210 per hour. We anticipate a cost savings to be at least 17%, but we're expecting a lot more. We expect a lot more, but right now we put in a decrease of 17%, a little placeholder.
Excuse me, so who did you get as the new counsel?
Oh, we're working with Murphy, Lemire Murphy in Quincy. Very happy with them.
And they're experienced school education firm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, why, if you're expecting a lot more, didn't you put it in?
With the budget's not huge. So the budget's only $45,000, give or take.
Okay.
So, yeah, and just in case, you never know. But
Didn't want to jinx ourselves.
right, it's lower than it has been.
But it was always overspent, so, and so the budget was always, it didn't reflect the actual projected cost, but this is an actual, you actually have a real budget this time.
Through attrition and some rearrangement in some departments, such as human resources, we are saving approximately $38,000 in non-union personnel salaries and $82,000 in support salaries. Our largest cost savings is in the tutors line. This is misleading. Through the zero-based budget process, we identified staff that were budgeted in these lines that should not have been, such as the aides, and moved them to the appropriate accounts. In addition, tutor salaries are now budgeted according to the contracted amounts and the encumbered amounts in the system. So we know exactly what our obligations are starting on day one. There are times that tutors will need to work more than their contracted amount, but again, now we have a better idea of what the obligations are. Also, we hired aides in places where tutors were doing the aides' work. And lastly, the FY20 recommended amount for tutors is only $221,000 more than FY18 actuals. Is less. Is only $220,000 less than FY18 actuals, not the $748,000 that it looks like this on this slide.
So the difference between the 748 and the 221 is $500,000. So the issue of the aides accounts for maybe 150 grand. So where's the rest?
Explain that, say that again?
Okay, so the
Sure.
difference between the 748 on the slide and the 221 is about $500,000. right?
Sure.
So you mentioned that there was a reclass issue, which you had spoken about on the last slide on aides, where you see a growth
Yeah.
there versus a reduction. So I see a growth of 150 there.
Yeah,
So that would explain 150 of the
Right,
500.
so-
Where's the rest?
So we had, simply it was overfunded.
Overfunded.
Aides, tutors were overfunded because they're hourly.
Oh,
And
okay.
it was a surplus in FY18. It's actually a surplus in FY19.
So you just weren't spending the money?
We were spending the contracted amount, but there was at the end of the year, there was a surplus.
When you say a surplus, meaning you didn't spend the money or you spent more than the
It
budget?
was reallocated.
Okay. but
Yeah.
you didn't spend the money in the budget. It went somewhere else.
Correct, yeah.
You didn't spend it in that line item.
Correct. Yep.
So,
This will connect to the special education conversation. Many of these lines do. We've been very reliant on our tutor population. So I think in the prior budget methodology, there was always this anticipation that we were gonna need more and more and more, and we better be sure we could accommodate for that, not knowing what the needs of the kids were gonna be. The combination of the zero base has identified what we actually need, plus the reorganization of special education is shifting that mindset. So the combination of the two is much of why that's gonna be a much easier and more reliable number going forward.
So our largest cost driver is the special education tuitions. Again, we took a zero-based approach to this. We identified every student's costs as well as our periphery costs. So through the good work of the special education department in the schools, we are providing more services to our students to keep them in district, hence the sort of the increase in the contract services. This is the reason for, also we anticipate to have at least $150,000 in circuit breaker carryover from FY19. For you that that don't know what circuit breaker is, it's money the state gives us over a certain threshold of a tuition. Say it's $45,000. The state reimburses us the next year roughly anywhere from 65 to 72%. So we anticipate at the end of this fiscal year to have at least $150,000 that we can allocate to next year to bring down FY20's costs. So you'll notice in the line item budget, we have an offset of $950,000. And again, 150 of that is from this year, and we expect at this time $800,000 to be our reimbursement for FY19's tuitions. Did you have a question on that?
Yeah, it's just what line?
It's in that, it's towards the back. It's in the 900, so it's second to last page. It's the only negative that's in the budget. It's an offset. Yeah. So at this time, our total anticipated out-of-district tuitions for FY20 is $3,134,043, which is $716,000 less than FY19's budgeted. But as you know, special education is a moving target. It's very fluid. These numbers are as of November 3rd. And so far, we haven't had many changes.
And just a little bit of background as to why those numbers are where we think they're going to be going. As of today, we've been able to keep approximately 10 kids in CPS in district just this year based on their needs. And we've been using some of the savings to then hire a teacher to keep more kids in and trying to build it without asking you for additional FTEs. You remember last year we asked for one, but now that program's running and robust and healthy, and I smile because they're little and they're fun to be with. And some other social emotional needs have popped this fall, and we've gone into that same mode and have 3 other kids staying in, one at the middle school and 2 at Thoreau. And we're just building our capacity here to do more and more of this, and it's all really exciting. So, and fiscally good too.
So I would like to say that is a terrific example of the conversation we had earlier about doing smart things to potentially bend the cost curve out in future years.
Yes, no question. Special education. I was talking with some other superintendents. Right? Aside from the contracts, it's the biggest discretionary, and I use that as a light word because it's so heavily mandated. But in terms of costs we have to produce, we have some ability to manage that, and I think that's the ability we're trying to gain within the scope of what's reasonable. There'll always be some kids we can't service. But hopefully we can bring those numbers down.
And it's the right thing to
And
do
it's
for the
good
kids.
for kids, which is the best part. That's right.
Setting them out of district, apparently.
So the next slide sort of speaks for itself. This is the projected early retirement incentive savings through FY23. This fiscal year, we're expecting 9 employees have taken this incentive, and that is the savings in the next 4 years.
So could I go back to your budget driver slide where employee separation was 286,000, 198% increase, but my main question there is that one of the main budget drivers is salary teachers at 1.1 million. So if we were to not have the $286,000 separation, what would the teacher salary line have risen to if those 8.5 FTEs had stayed on staff and we had not done this? What would that have meant?
I'd say at least 270,000 more, potentially.
So it's nearly a 1-to-1.
Yeah.
It's nearly a wash, and we have future benefits from having the new staff be at a lower step.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
So, sorry, does that imply it's about a 2-year payback on that 3-year?
So the CPS has 8 locations: preschool, district-wide kindergarten, district-wide elementary, Alcott, Thoreau, Willard Middle School, and district-wide. The following 8 slides summarizes the expense categories by location, starting with the preschool. The preschool location increased roughly 21% due to an increase in special ed contract services, aid salaries, and teacher salaries. The contract service increase is more in line with our actual spending costs. So if you look at the FY18 actuals, our budget is more in line with that. The preschool, the increase in aides and teacher salaries was because we moved salaries that were budgeted in other locations to this location and not due to an increase in staff.
Just look at these lines.
There is also contractual obligations contributing to the increase.
Contracted services.
Just a couple comments on preschool. One is we are bringing in the same consultants to review the preschool as we did all of K-8 in the high school. So we'll be undergoing recommendations from them and discussing some reorganizations. You also can see we've been chasing this the last few years because of the number and needs of the kids. So hopefully we're to a stable, fully vetted program that can maintain and intake any kids that come up from here on. The final piece is in the capital discussion that we're not going to have tonight for the warrant articles. One of our articles will be about preschool tuition because our regular education kids who are there to create a well-rounded environment for the special education kids that we are mandated to serve, they are paying tuition, which right now we don't have a revolving account to collect. So it's been going to the town's general fund. That is collected, in most districts, that's collected to offset some of these costs. So that's something Chris has agreed to let me pursue. Obviously, it's a town meeting discussion, but we would like to see it's about 150,000 that should be offsetting some of that. So we'd like to continue that conversation as well.
Next is a relatively small budget, the district-wide kindergarten.
Can I follow up on that point? That's a very astute thing to be thinking of. When we get circuit breaker money, does that go into the town's general fund as well, or does that come directly to
That comes directly to us because we have a designated circuit breaker revolving account.
We do. Okay, thanks.
There's a small decrease in district-wide kindergarten, again due to the zero-based budgeting and identifying what expenditures are needed in the district-wide program. This is a small budget request of $26,000 for FY20, but expenditures that are not directly associated with one particular school, and that's the reason for this district-wide category and location. The district-wide elementary location, that's increasing only 1.19%. Few categories may stick out to you. One is salaries for clerical, which is increasing because of a change in where someone was being charged in the past. So it's an increase in this line, but a decrease in another line in a different location. There's also a large decrease in the tutor lines, because these tutors are now budgeted in the locations in which they work. Other positive and negative swings are also a result of the zero-based budgeting process and also consolidating the lines.
How does salary not go up in this group compared to the others?
It's just because they were really just identifying people that are district-wide, and they're in this line, and there were people that were not district-wide that were budgeted in these lines in the past. Yeah.
Thank you.
So really, a little getting ahead of myself, when I'm comparing FY '21's request to you, we'll be able to really explain every single swing. Right now, it's just a lot of just, again, consolidating, figuring out exactly what our obligations are. And for the most part, we can explain them, but it's just a lot of consolidating.
Did I understand you to say that you reduced the number of categories by 72 to 400 something, and that next year there would be more?
I think there would absolutely be more. So we had 512 lines in this budget. We reduced it by 72. I expect us to reduce it by another 50 next year. I hope. There's a lot of lines.
Before you move on, when you get to each one of these, can you just say what goes into these contract services?
Sure.
Because I see each category has contract services and it adds up.
So a lot of it is mostly special ed contract services. And that's pretty much that. Maybe there might be a little PD contract services that is technically a contract services, but for the most part, I put them in PD lines.
Yeah, it's mostly special ed. There's a little bit of translation services in there for some of our ELL families, but the lion's share of it is special ed, and it varies depending on the needs of the kids in the building.
So each school has its own contract services for special ed, and then this is district-wide contract service for special ed.
Again, we're doing a whole full review of how we're using contract services, because there may be points where it's cheaper to hire a specialist than to keep contracting out over and over. So we're doing all that analysis now to figure out if there's some places we would be better off having employees with certain credentials rather than having to contract out every time a need comes up.
So the Alcott School, the school discretionary lines such as PD, equipment, and supplies were all increased over the FY19 budgeted amounts, but again, they're more in line with the FY18 actuals. All three elementary schools are relatively similar in their discretionary expenditure budgets. Overall, the Alcott school budget is increasing 3.27%. There is an 8.2% increase in teachers, mainly due to the double step increase. The reduction in tutors is the result of the zero-based budget and budgeting exactly our obligations based on contracted amounts and not due to a major reductions in the tutors. The amount requested for FY20 in the tutor line is still higher than FY18 actuals. The major increase in supplies is due to consolidating district-wide supply lines and budgeting them in the elementary schools where the expense is happening.
This category that says longevity, it's in all the schools. What is that?
So contractually, teachers, longevity is teachers. They get amount of money for a 10-year, a 15-year, a 20-year. We call it experience, and it's all contractual. Clerical also gets it, as well as maintenance, and historically we've budgeted them in the lines themselves. So we separated out the teachers' ones because they had been separated out, and the other ones are in there, but they're relatively minor, the other contracts.
So this is like a small stipend, like it's a bonus, so to speak, for
Correct.
for longevity.
For experience.
Yeah.
Yep. So the Thoreau budget is increasing 4.16%. Contract services are increasing 13.21 due to new special ed programs designed to keep the children in district. Aids have increased 47%, but it was mainly due to budgeting them in the correct account, as you can see by the FY18 actuals. Teacher salaries, again, are a big driver at 7.65% increase. The tutors have decreased but have been replaced by special ed teachers that happened earlier this fiscal year. And again, supplies are up for the same reasons that they are at the Alcott. The Willard is actually only increasing 0.41%. The main reason is the teacher's line is seeing a savings based on FY19 budgeted and projected FY20 obligations. Most of the savings in this line is through attrition and incentive. Contract services have increased due to special education programs. The professional development line is going up. It might stick out due to Wilson and foundation training. There is a decrease in the aid budget, mainly due to budgeting people again in the correct accounts, and not a 34% decrease in staff. The middle school is seeing a 4.56 increase overall. There were 103 lines in the middle school budget in FY20. We decreased it from 119 lines that was budgeted in FY19. Again, every single one of these lines was zero-based. The nurses' budget increased 20%, but is now in line with the FY18 actuals. That does stick out. The aides line is increasing 105,000. Teacher salaries are only going up 2.97% from the FY19 budgeted, but they're actually going up 14.3% from FY18 actuals. And lastly, the tutor budget is decreasing 23% from FY19 budget.
Chair, can I ask you a question? Just going back to the
Principals should be in the salary row. It's definitely budgeted. It must have gotten an incorrect type for some reason on my sheet, but the request is correct. So the total number is the total number is correct.
Lines.
Yeah.
Look it up.
Yeah. I will have to answer to you as soon as 2 seconds. So the district-wide location is decreasing 1.35% from FY19 budgeted. A lot of the reason for this is due to line consolidation, moving stipends, staff, and other expenditures to other locations. There were 158 budgeted lines in FY19 in the district-wide account. In FY20, we're down to 120. The contingency budget is up 61,000. The reason for this is we centralized our contingency. We budgeted 125,000 in the general fund contingency for FY20. Contract services have increased mainly due to maintenance contract services, but putting expenditures in the correct accounts. So district-wide, a lot of the drivers is for contract services is actually being maintenance. Salaries for teachers have gone up due to moving 2 specialists that were budgeted in the school but have a district-wide role. And tutors were moved to the correct school location, and supplies are increased but due to actual expenditures. And that is the CPS. Sure.
A couple of questions about district-wide. So could you explain more about the contingency? I see it was 0 in FY18, then you actually figured out it should have been 83. But what goes into contingency, and why are you spending now when they weren't spending before?
So you never spend out of the contingency. So the FY18 actual is 0 because it's an offset. So what we have in contingencies are, maybe, a salary for a teacher that we know that might have to hire for next year for special ed. Contingencies for the middle school move. That's the big one for FY20s. We don't know what that cost is. we didn't want to guess, so we threw in a contingency. It's good to have, anywhere from, 2 to 3% up to 5% of contingency in your budget. So we felt like 125 was enough for this budget. But you never spend out of the contingency, you transfer it to another account. But those are pretty much the things that are in the contingencies for FY20.
Okay, again, I always scratch my head, and previously, I never got an answer for this. So, this is basically just a small allocation so that you can transfer it to other unexpected funds. But in the past, we always had zero. And so somehow that wasn't what was used for the contingency. The spending was zero. It's always going to be zero?
No, it will always be zero because you never charge the contingency account in theory. So the FY18 actual is zero, but that's because nothing was spent out of that account.
All right, I see. And it never will be. It'll always be
Right.
transferred, so.
It will always be transferred, or it will sit there as just an offset at the end of the year, have 125 in there. Hopefully I use that for other offsets. Okay, yeah.
And then last year, in the last few years, we've had presentations in the middle of the year for contingencies, and there was always some reason we couldn't use contingency funds. Like last year was all these pregnancies, and I think there was the last couple of years, they said there were a whole bunch of pregnancies. So they needed more money in the middle of the year. So this time now we'll be using it for that. Is that the idea?
So in the past, and I can only speak to 1 year's worth, the contingency was there as a placeholder for anything that might come. And then because we were living to a bottom line of the entire budget, without having a solid detail at each line item, it was harder to have the checkpoints along the way, as we're going to be able to do now and as we're doing pretty effectively this year. So there was always a concern that if unexpected things happened, we may need more funds to close. We never actually moved the supplemental discussions that happened. We are not putting a supplemental article on this year. We know we don't need it. So I think as we tighten up,
It wasn't last
we're
year, I'm sorry,
actually-
it was the years before this.
Yeah, and I was part of that discussion to some extent last year because the same pattern was playing out. We're so sure of where all the dollars are going and where they're coming from and where our available monies are should unexpected things happen that we're much more confident in not needing to keep asking for those buffers.
In this budget, there's no other lines. So we didn't put a whole bunch in salaries. The 125 really, right now, is our contingency. Correct.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, Mary, go ahead. Just one other question about this. There's legal here and there's legal from Willard. Are those two separate budgets?
Let's see. Legal is a district-wide line. I don't see it here.
Well, not Willard, I'm sorry, for middle. It's for
Oh,
middle
the
school.
middle school, yeah, the middle school does have, it has in the past, I believe, had a legal line.
There is.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. So, yes, they separated in the past.
That may be one we consolidate
Exactly.
as we go into FY21.
Yeah. Same with tuitions.
So-
Tuitions potentially should be, instead of having it in every school, or, even separating the middle school, it should be one district-wide line. Or it should be four, it should be, the four different types of tuitions that we have.
So the legal budget's really 47,000 for the CPS.
That is combined. So the legal that I talked about as a driver, that combined the middle school as well as the district.
I see,
Yeah.
okay.
Great,
Mary?
okay.
Mary?
Yeah, I want to step back for a minute and look at, first of all, I'm delighted with the $700,000 that you're saving on the special ed tuitions, that's great. But when I look at what you're asking for is a 1.1 million increase, right? And I'm struck by a comment you made earlier, which is 96% of that is teacher salaries, and that's net of savings from early retirement?
It's a net savings of all of the zero-based work that went into this. So It's everything.
But I mean, that 96% of the 1.1 million increase that you're asking for, 96% of that is teacher salaries, and that's net of the early retirement savings. Is that correct? Okay. So thinking forward, right, what other things can we do to bend that cost curve besides early retirement? So have you thought about that?
Still going, absolutely. There really won't be any stone uncovered. We're looking at everything from cell phones to copiers, some of those kinds of basic things, as well as how we're delivering services. Transportation is going to be a significant one, which we're in the throes of now with that consultant.
Yep.
Some of that will be a discussion of not only management of the fleet, but service, and are we going to continue at the level of service we're used to providing, or do we look at ways to save that and ask people to be a little more flexible with us? We're still running lists all throughout.
But that looks like that's around the fringes, and the 96% is
Well, it's
teacher
a CPA
salaries, right?
negotiations here, if that's what you're.
That's what I'm getting at, yeah.
We hear the concern.
Okay, on the DESI numbers, the categories are broad categories represented by account number. And they're broken down line item accounts. Is there any way of mapping this
Yeah.
to the DESI numbers?
So, and I'll even send you the link. So what I do online is every month I have a variance report that I send to the school committee. So I actually have one that I'm presenting tomorrow. And what it has is it has it by 1,000 category, and then what is in each category broken down. So like the 1,000s, what's in the 1,000s? What's in the 2,000 instructional services? It's all of our teachers, all of our supplies for teachers. You know, the 3,000s. So I can.
But does it map to anywhere, like this 24-digit account number?
Oh, so yes. So it is the second. If you're looking at the budget, the first thing is the 101s mean middle school. The next thing is DESI's function. So the next sequence of numbers is DESI.
Four numbers there?
Yep.
And they've been rolled up by the thousands on your slide.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Quarterly, we're bringing updates to the school committee at the hundreds level.
Right.
So we get a little more granular on a quarterly basis.
And again, when we present the superintendent's recommended budget book, it's going to have DESI functions by 1,000s, but also most likely by 100s for each location, and then that same numbers by expense categories. So everything would match up by location. You can see how I did it.
Okay. So, and then just follow up question.
Sure, absolutely.
So the DESI function 2,000,
Yes.
instructional
Services. Instructional services.
Instructional services.
Yep.
Teaching. Okay, so, and so if we look down, well, let's see, there were some things in here, okay, yeah, art replacement equipment, yeah, okay, well, that is, all right. Some of them seemed, I didn't quite, wasn't able to follow.
Yeah. And one of the things too that we are doing is we are doing a full audit of our internal accounts. I would say 99.9% of the accounts that we're sending up to DESI are correct, but they're constantly changing. So we're going to be doing an internal audit once this is all done, sometime in the spring. And I would say every single year we're going to be doing an internal audit of DESI's account structure. But for the most part, we are in good shape. And if it doesn't necessarily match what DESI says, we also have a crosswalk. But what we did do, if you remember at the beginning of this fiscal year, is we were presenting our district leadership and admin, which is the 1,000 function, at a higher increase. The reason for that is because we were presenting the curriculum director's salary as a 1,000, as an assistant superintendent, when in fact it's a director's, so it should be a 2. So basically it drove down our administration costs.
I have, following on to Mary's question, I just make sure I understand if I go back to your second slide on the FY20 budget drivers. So the increase between what you actually spent in the prior year and what you would like to spend in the coming year is 2.6 million, or around 7%. And that's what you detail on that second slide. So it's really about a 7% growth in cost. And of that, if I look at what piece of that is teaching, it's about $1.5 million is related to teaching. And I assume if I went underneath that, the majority of that is driven by contractual increases. Is that right?
It's due mainly, so the contractual increases for teachers this year will be the biggest that we've seen due to the double step increase.
Mm-hmm.
So on average, give or take, if you're in step and lane, and you're not on the top step, you're getting between a 4 and 5% increase every year. Once you get to the top step, which is the step 16, you're at the COLA, which right now is about 2.75% increase. And we have a mix and match of top paid employees and people that are still on the step and scale.
So the double step is FY19.
Double step is FY19.
That's right, yeah. Okay.
But it's really FY20. It's the last day.
Last day of
Yeah, because
So
it's
they're actually, so say, use that example again, if you're master step 6, making 60,000, just they're making more than that, but 60,000. Next year you're in master 8, which is roughly 70,000. And you'll see that increase in FY20's budget. That does not include COLA, and we projected the cost of just the double step increase to be about 740,000. So every 1%, give or take, is 250 to 300,000.
So this is, clearly a one-time event here this year, but we're trying to manage this, so. That's,
So those with the double step don't get COLA on top of that?
We're negotiating that. In this expiring contract, we know that everyone's getting a double step. So that's an obligation. And then COLA would be negotiated. So we expect this year, again, we found the 1.6 million in budget savings, and we've identified the cost drivers. I mean, this year we'll see the largest amount of savings, but also we're seeing the largest amount of cost drivers because of that double step. But I don't anticipate being able to identify 1.6 million every year in budget savings, but it was a good start.
Yes.
we find out 744.
Kudos to everybody. Yeah. Any more questions? Again, the functions are very confusing, and I will link them to you all. And then me, doing expense categories kind of threw a little monkey in it, but I thought it was easier to identify categories rather than the DESI functions and no one knowing what's behind it.
So that was, you touched on the line of questioning that I think Heather pursued at your meeting a week or so ago. If you back out the impact of the double step of 740, after that, the increase in budget was a quite modest, how much?
So I know the question, so basically I can't get to the exact amount, but we know that teacher salaries are up 2.7 million on FY18 actuals. About 740,000 is the double step increase for FY20. So I would say it's, half of that, give or take, the delta in between is our 1.2-ish, is going to be our average year of contractual increases for, and that's a rough estimate. We won't see, a lot as large increase.
George,
I just thought something was interesting to note. On the utility section, I noticed that the Willard School was about 25,000 less than the other two schools. I just thought that was interesting to know, because I know when we built it, we spent a little extra money to make it greener and more efficient. So it's nice to see the numbers bear it out.
Peter, you must know what our capital plans are going to talk about, because part of what we're proposing tomorrow night is a discussion on green initiatives at Thoreau and Alcott, because we have aging ERUs, and there's a definitive science to what you just said. So,
Yeah, it's nice to see the numbers.
yep.
The other thing I noted on the utilities section was the middle schools, which surprised me, was that for 2 buildings, it was about 240, so 120,000 per building, which...
There are brand-new boilers in those 2 schools.
Yeah, is that
Yep.
is that the reason there?
I'd say that's
Okay.
most of the reason. Yep. They're the shiniest rooms in the whole school.
Yeah, they're like 3 years old, 2 or 3
You'd like to
years
come
old.
see them.
Pretty neat.
The brightest, cleanest spots.
Yeah, those buildings cost less than the other ones.
Yeah.
Thanks.
We actually aren't going to, and this is previewing tomorrow night, we're going to try to take a year to look at subsidies and things like that for some of these needs we just talked about. So there is not a warrant article recommended at the moment unless they suggest it. High school?
So, again, to go over the zero-based budget process, everything we did for the CPS budget, we did for the high school budget. So, just want to say that instead of going over that slide again. But I wanted to point out a few things about that, though. What we were able to do with the high school, there were 310 high school lines in FY19. And we were able to reduce that by 47 to 263. Again, that's for a high school. There shouldn't be that many lines. So again, I expect that to be reduced even more for FY21s. And we're also looking into the same things with the high school: cell phones, copiers, and hire the transportation consultant for the high school side as well.
Can I just highlight a couple of, because the bulk of the budget is here, and we're going to talk on some pretty specific components of it, both with the expenses and savings, and then the much more complicated parts of this. The zero-based process was very effective with the department chair leadership, because at the high school, it's a big school, so Mr. Mastrullo sits with his leadership team and charges them to go back to their departments and look at how they're operating. And we did see quite a bit of positive come from that. We know what they need. They've identified longer-term needs. We were doing a lot of immediate budget discussions that over the summer budgets we realized, oh, we need this textbook, oh, we need that. And now we're planning much farther ahead and building ourselves a textbook cycle. So hopefully the numbers will stay status quo for the most part, with a little bit of shifting within them, so that the long-term needs are level. So I think we're pretty excited about that. That's probably, among the supplies and materials, the most important thing to note. Among the teaching staff, we are asking for no increases at all. Any needs we have, we're just reallocating within. Always looking within to see what we can do differently and how we can utilize what we already have.
So the superintendent's high school budget for FY20 is $34,909,657, which is 3.44% higher than the FY19 school committee approved budget. Again, this chart breaks down the recommended budget by DESI function and breaks it down in comparison to FY18's, the deltas between FY18 actual versus FY18 budgeted, and then the FY20 requested, and the delta between FY19 budgeted. There are some large drivers, such as instructional leadership and fixed charges, and some large reductions, including district leadership and admin, debt service, and programs with other districts.
Excuse me. So what are fixed charges?
Fixed charges are the,
Is OPEB in there?
OPEB is not in there.
Health insurance?
Oh my God, I'm drawing a complete blank. My apologies. Yeah.
Way in the weeds.
So a lot of the 5,000s includes, as soon as I see one, it's gonna. I know it's a lot of maintenance.
You don't have every line memorized
I-
tonight?
Really does. He did. Until you get a few days off.
Stage fright. Just give them to do that to you.
Oh, I'm sorry. The fixed charges is the debt. Yeah. But there's also debt, but other fixed charges. No, it's not.
Something else. Is it health
We have debt
insurance?
service, which is
I'm sorry.
Isn't it health insurance?
It is workers' comp, and it's insurance, unemployment. OPEB is in fixed charges.
Right.
So, yeah, sorry about that. I was looking at the 486 instead of the 4 million number. So, that's what's
That's
in
why
there.
that increase is so big. because
So is it health insurance
and
too?
OPEB are in
Health
there.
Health insurance.
Health insurance,
Yeah.
right. Just remember the complications of this budget is that everything's included, so those are always the challenges of balancing the instruction with those needs.
All right. So the same thing as I did at CPS, I also did at the high school level, broke them down by categories. Instead of 32 categories at CPS, I created 50 categories at the high school. These included banking, charter assessment, gain contingency, contract services, debt, early retirement, equipment, insurance here, legal, teacher longevity, teacher stipends, maintenance, memberships, OPEB, overtime, professional development, admin manager salaries, teacher salaries, all the salaries, etc. Other expenses included supplies and materials, textbook curriculum, substitutes, workers' compensation, social security, unemployment, utilities. So again, I created 50 expense categories in the regional side, 18 more than the CPS side. So the ones identified on this slide are the biggest drivers. Again, contract services is up 10.82 due to the same reasons they are at the CPS level. Special education contract services are going up 34,000 due to current and FY20 needs. And again, also the expense type we're now charging them to. Maintenance contract services are up 22,000. And lastly, special education and transportation costs are increasing 83. So between those three categories, we're roughly at 10.82%. Employee separation costs are going up 230%. This may be misleading. It's the same thing as the CPS. We budgeted everybody at a savings of roughly $30,000. Savings are directly in the teachers' lines. This is also the first year that we know what our employee separation costs are for the early retirement incentive. And also contractual, the sick leave buyback is increasing $16,651 over FY19. Insurance is increasing $220,000 over FY19's budget. Health insurance is going up between 10 and 11%, as well as the higher health insurance. So it's a really big driver. We are funding other post-employment benefits back to the ARC. This is almost a 31% increase from FY19's budgeted amount. The $185,000 in OPEB accounts for 13.6 of our recommended total increase.
Can I interrupt? So we've put this back at the ARC because I didn't feel like this was a decision that we could make without school committee discussion. So the recommended budget right now does fully fund it back to the ARC. Point of reference, tomorrow night they're going to be some conversation on that. I have a pretty strong opinion that needs to get talked about. You're welcome to share yours. I think there's more discussion to be had there. It just was not a number I was going to pick in my office without the school committee's input. So by all means tonight, I think they want to hear your opinions on where you'd like to see that number.
The athletic coaches, that's going up 41%, but that's very misleading. The actual actuals for FY18 were $87,000 more than the FY19 budget. So they were underfunded in FY18 as well as FY19. In addition, we increased our user fees. 70,000 of the maintenance contracts for the fields are now being paid out of the athletic revolving account. Therefore, there's still not 70,000 worth, but we needed to include a little bit more in the general fund for the coaches because we did not anticipate, we don't have the money in the athletic revolving account for that. We also are introducing 2 new sports, very minor, about 11,000 for the 2 new sports. One is freshman girls basketball, and the other is gymnastics. So the overall line is going up 125,000, but really mostly due to really catching up from our actuals.
So there's a lot of numbers there.
Yep.
The first is, and one of the things that we don't really have that much visibility into is the revolving account. And so what you said is that some of these coaches' salaries were previously paid out of the revolving account, but you've increased the monies coming into the revolving account, but you've moved these coaching salaries into the budgeting area. So I'm just a little, like, there's more money in there, and
They've been in the budgeted area, so this would be part of those overages and underages that we now need to level off. So
were we just overspending the coaching account? Like, we were budgeting a low number but overspending for the last couple of years? Is that the?
Again, I think the zero-based piece is flushing that out so that we know exactly what we need in both accounts and are covering all of our costs and showing it.
Okay. It's just very hard to square this large increase with the fact that the revolving fund is now, you now have larger, user fees for athletics, and yet we still have.
Well, what we didn't want to do, we had the option to make this a very minimal increase here to clean it up, and then not talk about the field usage. And what we said when we increased the fee was that money would go to the fields. So it was a 3-way trade, which is harder to follow for sure. Rather than just showing it as a very minor increase here for the 2 sports.
So the takeaway sounds like the fields themselves cost more to maintain than we had previously been ready to spend. Let's just say that. We increased the user fees. We told the parents, we need this to keep the fields at a good level that you were expecting. And we've moved this athletic coaching salaries out of that, and now they're in this budget. Because we don't have visibility into the revolving.
Which we're happy to give you. The issue really is that the line item in the budget was underfunded for coaches all along.
Okay.
So we're playing catch up to 18 and 19 being less than what we were actually spending.
Is the cost to maintain the fields showing up in the 20 line, or did you pull that out?
So that's down because it's going to get paid for out of the athletic fund.
Okay, I would say that it would be really helpful for the sake of cleanliness for us to see the fully loaded cost of running the athletic program.
That was on my desk this morning because I asked for the same thing last week.
Revolvers need to come, the revolving funds need to then be in your sources of revenue. But it would be.
We have it, we can get it to you.
Just, like obviously Jared's, not getting any sleep. But in terms of
I
all of us
completely anticipated that question, so we have that ready to go. We'll forward it to you. We looked at it this morning.
While we're at, where does the athletic coach's salary show up in the?
It's in there.
Yep, that's in around
In here.
You have athletics on page 3, towards the bottom, below adult community ed total.
So it's line number S85. And if you look at this FY18 actuals, it shows you that the actuals was 387,000 in FY18. And then this year's budget, FY19, was 301. So what we're also doing superintendent's requested budget booklet that we're gonna give you. We're gonna break down those revolving accounts. If you remember from the fall booklet that we gave you,
Yes.
we sort of started with that. We gave the beginning balance, and then the ending balance, as well as all the revenue. It's very important that we show that, especially at the high school side, and we will show that, because that is a true source of revenue. We also talk about circuit breaker and the other miscellaneous revolving accounts that we do have.
What are those other revolving accounts?
Say that again?
What are the other revolving
There's
accounts?
a number of, small student ones, but the biggest ones is really the circuit breaker, grants. We talk about grants, but a lot of them are enrichment revolving accounts. for the most part.
We've had some donations that have gone on in perpetuity through some generous people. And the other most significant one was when we were doing the lease to buy laptop program that frankly wasn't very successful. We still have a little bit of money that trickles in from that for parents who are in the later years of buying their laptops.
What about the parking fees, the student parking fees?
Yep, that's another one that
That's a
goes right to
revolving
the security staff who do all the oversight of the grounds.
The food services are big that we talk about. Those are big.
Thanks, sorry to belabor
So the increase in support staff salaries is contractual, and we appropriately funded the accounts and put staff where they should be with the zero-based budget process. There were no increases in support staff FTEs in FY19 or FY20. Teacher salaries account for $13,371,299 of the $34.9 million requested, and 46.1% of the FY20 recommended increase. The amount requested is contractual. The amounts budgeted for teachers in FY20 is $945,000 more than FY18's actuals. Software hardware is increasing $118,201. We are currently discussing with the school committee what our plan is going to be. In this budget, we put in enough money to buy them. I didn't bring it, I probably should have, but we passed out a handout at the last school committee meeting. We did a 10-year projection on what it would cost to buy versus lease versus some sort of deferred payment. We realize the savings is quite significant by FY22, FY23. Obviously, there's an upfront cost for that. I think the difference between buying and leasing for next year is $221,000.
So
But it catches up.
what are you buying in?
This
This is mostly the laptops,
375 laptops to purchase in next year's budget.
so it's not really software, it's hardware.
It's
The drivers, the laptop.
drivers.
This was another that we put in the most fiscally aggressive recommendation. The school committee's gonna need to talk on. Leasing does drop your operational costs for this year, but over time is more expensive, so that's some of the conversation they're gonna continue to have.
So overall, we identified 1.5 million in budget drivers. Through the zero-based budget process, we identified some cost savings. So to offset the budget drivers, we identified $522,000 in cost savings. Debt is going down $202,000, not part of the operating, but that is something to show. There's a reduction in transportation salaries because the full salary contingency increase for the 2017-2018 school year time change was not needed. Not all of it was needed. Transportation driver salaries are budgeted for the next year $57,636 more than FY18 actuals, but it was overfunded by $158,000 for FY20. The tutors line is reducing 5.94% from FY19's budgeted due to encumbering the contracted amounts for each tutor in the system, and again, making sure everyone's in the right line. So we do the same thing that we do with the CPS level. Lastly, we are seeing a reduction in special ed tuitions from FY19's budgeted amount, and we're seeing a savings of about $101,000. So in FY20, the budget, as Dr. Hunter said, we fully funded the OPEB part. This was an increase of $185,368 from FY19's funded amount. This chart shows the estimated ARC until 2038. At the beginning of last month, Moody's Investors Service upheld the district's AAA rating, but the report stated that we are AAA with a negative outlook, which reflects our weakened reserve levels and elevated fixed costs following the completion of the new high school. Should our reserve levels weaken further or fixed costs substantially increase, it would put an additional downward pressure on the rating. Moody's said that we have one of the highest, if not the highest, OPEB balances of any school district in the state. But since our reserves are low and we continue to use E&D as a revenue source, having a low fund balance has more of a negative impact on our bond rating than having a high OPEB balance. Simply put, the weighted measure in the determination of bond rating, fund balance is more important than OPEB fund balance. They also stated that increasing our E&D balance or other reserve balances should be the focus for us, and we are on their watch list for the next 18 to 24 months.
So when they talk about elevated fixed costs, they're referring to debt and not debt service, which is declining, as your chart shows.
Yeah. So if we were to build another high school, that would
And so what's our funding ratio, our funding level with our OPEB trust, do you know?
say that again?
Our funding level, what % funded are we?
We, right now, the ARC, well,
So if it's analogous to a pension fund,
so,
there's a discount rate that we're discounting our future liabilities at compared to our assets. And so we're probably we're in the teens funded, does that sound right?
I bet you're probably still a little bit lower than that. I'd say 10%. I think right now, I think you have the book right there, is it 38 million?
Oh, God, you're gonna,
I can get you that. Ian is the whiz on the OPEB.
I guess I'm just wondering what the discount rate is and what the expected returns are to try to.
Roughly the 7%, but it's really 50% if you think about it. Many districts are doing the pay-as-you-go. But I can get more information.
So this is what I calculated as compounded 4%,
4%, yeah.
which is,
And this will change as soon as our actuary comes out again. Hopefully we'll be a little bit lower. And we expect that to be out early to late winter. We'll probably wait to do it.
does Moody's call you or talk to you when they do? And
They do,
okay.
yeah.
Because I can't understand, why would they prioritize E&D, a source of revenue, over extinguishing a future liability like an OPEB? Why is that? It would seem to me it should be the reverse of that.
Well, they're thinking about the now. So we have zero contingency. Not zero, but we have a small amount. E&D's being estimated, it's estimated about 2.7% right now. You can have up to 5, but we have no other contingencies. We didn't carry anything over for circuit breaker. We don't have any Chapter 71 revolving account. So the way that they're looking at it is OPEB is great, but when they're equal, when they're next to each other, having a higher fund balance is much more important in their weighted measure for bond rating than it is that having a high OPEB balance.
Presumably for debt service,
Correct.
a reserve to pay debts to fund finance.
That or, God forbid something happened during the year, we will be able to cover the costs.
I think too, they're looking at our patterns of the last few years. We're using, last year it was 689,000 out of E&D as a revenue source. So to be using that kind of one-time money in an operating budget year after year, where you can't replenish it as fast as you're pulling it out, just frankly is a cash flow problem.
Right.
2 years out, we don't have anything in E&D if we continue at this path. So in my very lay person educator world, I'm like, well, they're right. We can't continue the way we've been operating. So I think Moody's was just reinforcing that perhaps the money that was, they could see we were having this tug and pull with E&D and OPEB, and gave us their opinion on what
So-
to prioritize, at least in the short term. I think in the long term, you're probably right.
So not
but-
being a credit analyst, I would say you could spend less, and you could extinguish a future liability.
You could, and we've tried very hard to get to that as much as we can. In the meantime, though, we need to slow that E&D revenue source down, which is what we're going to talk about.
Well, their wording suggests that they don't want to see that number go lower. Period. And we're looking at taking it lower. And yes, because we're looking at using E&D again to fund next year's budget at a slower rate.
Much slower.
But still, that they're gonna look at it and say, you went back to the well and you used it, yep, you used less. So a concern, having been a credit analyst, corporate, not municipal, is it is much easier to get a downgrade than to reclaim the rating. And, you know, I don't know enough to know and wonder, you know, are they okay? Have you had a conversation with them? Are they going to look favorably over the next 18 to 24 months if they see it slowing, or have they fired a shot across the bow that said, stop it?
So my understanding is that we have been on their watch list for a number of years, since we've used E&D as a revenue source. What they're saying basically is, you use $689,000 in FY19. If you put that all back, great. They're not looking at it as you using it as a revenue source. They're looking at the fund balance.
Oh, right,
So
but it's going to be even lower
it,
in absolute dollars.
right.
And we could, back of the envelope, look at it as a percent of the budget to see how that changed, but presumably it's not in the right direction. And my concern is, do we really understand if we've been on outlook negative for a couple of years, or do we just go to outlook negative?
I think Mr. Flaherty had been talking about that they had been the outlook negative for a couple of years. So I think though,
That's typically, you know, not a great thing in the.
I don't think they were as definitive as they were
Right,
this time.
right.
He would always say,
So they've been
we're
concerned,
going to be in
we officially went outlook negative, they've been concerned about
Yeah, and
it,
they
they've
put it
been
in
concerned,
writing.
and we haven't been going the right way. So, you know, I think that not only in your revenue scenarios, but as both Concord and Carlisle look at this, you know, I don't fully understand, and maybe Carrie can help us understand, how do the town bond ratings get influenced by what the region's bond rating is?
We can certainly do that homework. I think you'll see that our proposed recommendation right now is to cut that revenue source down in half. To be more aggressive than that is either going to require a big conversation with Concord and Carlisle combined, or start cutting programs. So I think we're trying to find that sweet middle spot where we do something pretty substantial here and show them the intention while we maintain service.
So you mentioned that Carlisle had a particular view on OPEB, so what is their issue? That we are funding it or that we are not funding it?
Yeah, they have it, and I haven't talked to my school committee yet about this, so I don't want to preempt it too much, but they don't have the same aggressive philosophy as we hear here.
I have a follow-up just on the overall, on that chart that shows the cost savings. So when you looked at the zero-based results, in the CPS world, it looks like between 3.5% and 4% you actually got out of the 19 budget. In the high school, it's less than 1%. What causes that? What was the difference?
I think it's because, you know, only 3/4 of the high school budget is really staff and instructionally related. Almost 1/4 of it is insurance and OPEB, and so you have a lot less room right there. But I think too, the high school budget's always been tighter for the last number of years. I think we've been back in that in a different way than we had been at CPS. Because as all those contingencies got smaller, with circuit breaker being used up, we were being very tight with what we were spending. So I think some of that work had already been done in the past couple of years.
slide, again, this is the early retirement incentive savings. Speaks for itself a little bit. We anticipated vacancies for getting the incentive this year, and our projected savings up until FY '23.
I'd like to visit that for 1 second if we could.
These are part-time people, I want to qualify that, so that's one of the reasons the numbers are so much lower.
That's fine. So returning to the budget drivers, this speaks to the salary teachers line. You're saying these are part-time people, so I'm not gonna dwell on that as much. All I want to get some insight into is the CCHS, CCTA. I think they're the unit here. Their increase is 4.05%, but they don't have a double step. But over at CPS, we were able to contain it somehow to an increase of only 5%, even though there is a double step going on. How is it that these two salaries are so close in number when there's a double step over at CPS and they're only rising by 5.14 and this is 4.05? It just seems like they're pretty close, only there's a double step going on at CPS.
Yeah, just budgeting the obligations, and comparing it to what FY19 is budgeted, there was really no magic.
Okay.
This is just what our obligations are versus FY19 budget.
Okay, it's hard to square that they're getting this really big increase at CPS and this is a regular contractual increase, but it's still 4 point.
You know, we can run all the FTE parts now that we've actually done this, but, you know, we had 18 teachers total take the lead,
Yep.
take the lead with CPS, not 18, but a lot.
Yeah.
We can go back to that slide. But at CPS, we had 6, and almost all of them are part-time,
Part-time,
probably 2/3
three-
of them.
three
So right
FTEs.
there, you're gonna still have a lot more people at the bottom level and step,
Yep.
who are gonna, you know, benefit from the cost of living while the others are moving up. The high school also has more part-time people in general, so I think we haven't done this analysis, I'm intrigued to do it. I think we do have some cost savings because of that. The good news is, Dean, this is based on actual people and
Okay.
every single individual.
It is what it is. It just seems like it's hard to square it when we know that CPS is getting a double step for their contract and the folks at CCHS are not.
And remember, there's still some cleanup going on here because
Yeah.
we were carrying substitutes in the teacher lines, and so some of that ebb and flow, it may be affecting the final percentages.
And I do anticipate that 4% is really a good number
Yep.
for the teachers, so I think next year we're going to come back and say it's roughly 4%, but also at the CPS side as well, we do
Okay.
everything. So this slide speaks for itself a little bit. Here's our FY18 and FY20 active and retiree health insurance costs. Health insurance is going up between 10 and 11%. Between these two lines, it's about 185,000.
So an increase of 10 or 11%, those are the numbers that we see. Those are the numbers that we see here in the budget. Do employees and retirees also see those kind of increases? So we pay a fixed percentage.
So it's a 50-50, yeah. Correct.
Thank you.
And as you know, this is a fixed cost that CPS, our general fund budget, does not see, but the high school does.
So question about OPEB, so that you have $349,000 to pay for a retiree health insurance costs. Is that money coming, is it kind of sloshing through the OPEB account and then back out? Or is this is a separate line item that we pay each year?
I believe this is a separate line item.
So we're putting money aside for yet future stuff, and that's just in a trust account of some sort, and we're paying out of current account for existing retirees.
Ian did explain to me that, to your point of some slush, there may be.
I'm not saying slush, not slush,
No,
it's
but there
sloshing
could be
through, I
some
mean,
ebb
it's
and
going in
flow
and coming out,
there.
yeah.
You're not wrong that there's some discussion we could have there. But at this point, we don't believe that's what you'd like us to do, is tap the OPEB account for current retired.
So what goes through the books is what's being expensed according to the accounting rules, right? So that's going to include your current year costs plus a piece of the future. And the difference is what builds up in that balance sheet account.
So of the 785 that we are anticipating, or is that the number? I've forgotten. I think that's the number, 785 that we're anticipating going to OPEB. Are we taking 349 of that and just paying it out and putting the remainder in the account? No. Okay, so this is, it's
That's the
additive.
difference.
It's additive. It's additive. This is additive.
Exactly.
stock
It's additive
flow.
to what you have to spend.
So it's really 785 plus
Plus what you're paying out.
349 is what we're paying for retirees.
Why is this percent so big? 291 to 349? Why is it jumping so?
That's just our anticipated cost. It really,
Okay.
the few people that took the retiree incentive jumped it up a little bit.
So more people plus an increase in the premiums per person? Okay,
These are all estimates, so that's what
okay.
Will in future years, the current year costs for that retiree part be going down because it's coming out of OPEB?
That all depends on, not right now, it all depends on.
Future,
Yeah,
yeah.
when the future is.
When we get to the magical future.
At some point, you're right, at some point, you're gonna start taking that reserve down, you're gonna have to. Yeah.
The ARC is gonna increase too.
Correct, yeah. And this slide just shows the debt that's going down to 202,000. And our debt service, known debt service is 2038. So as you know, unlike the CPS side, the regional side is responsible for projecting revenue. The following list of items is the revenue we receive before we figure out the total assessments to the two towns. So not only did we do the zero base, obviously, of the expenditures, but we did a zero base of the revenue. At this time, we're projecting a $33,732 increase in Chapter 70, a $67,369,000 increase in Chapter 71 transportation, and we are recommending a decrease of our E&D contribution by $339,460. We are projecting an $85,000 increase from FY19's budget amount in interest. We are showing that we receive about $80K in miscellaneous revenue and just a slight decrease in charter reimbursement. So the total general fund revenue, excluding assessments, is $3,634,494. And as you know, for Chapter 70, Chapter 71, and the charter reimbursement, the initial governor's budget doesn't come out until the fourth Wednesday in January. So these numbers are preliminary, but they're our best guess on the information that we currently have. So now I'm going to go into details what this revenue means.
Before we move off this, so this is general fund estimated revenue, but then you have numerous revolving accounts that are targeted for specific purposes.
So what we do
how does that work?
is for the revolving account, just like we did for the athletics, is we take it right off the top. Same with circuit breaker. So I don't like to have offsets. I did have that $950,000 offset for circuit breaker, but you do not, it's not sound budgeting practices to have offsets going right into revolving accounts. Auditors tell you to take it right off the top, but then show, say in the budget book or another slide, what the revolving account expenditures and revenues are. So this is only general fund.
Okay.
So,
So you mentioned, so you're basically taking money out of your E&D contribution. Where does the E&D contribution show up in the budget?
I'll show you the next slide. It's going to show up here.
Okay. The contribution.
Yes.
Doesn't show up. Yeah.
I think.
this is going to show the revenue from E&D, so
Right.
I think is that what you're asking?
This is the money, well, that's the
Or are you talking the money going into E and D?
budget, where's the money going into?
Money going into E&D happens at the close of the fiscal year. So in June, because we froze the budget and didn't spend anything, we actually closed. Free cash is the way to make you think of it. Just as we go through the next few options here, what we proposed to the school committee were, we call them scenarios so that they could see how some of the varying levels played out, most specifically to the OPEB and E&D rates. Because obviously our question at the schools were what percentage increase are we trying, what are we getting, what are our numbers equating to? Since we had a preliminary guideline from one of your discussions, like where are we even falling had to be part of the discussion. So Jared's going to talk you through 3 ways that we tried to outline the scenarios to try to help inform the school committee on how this budget could come to completion. So he's just going to talk through those 3. You can stop and ask questions, but the variables within the 3 are all OPEB and E&D related.
So this slide and the next is really one slide broken up into 2. And the way that I formatted this is the Mass Association of Regional Schools preferred format. So the way that it reads is based on the regional agreement, assessments are dictated by the October 1st enrollment. So according to the October 1st enrollment, right at the top there, you're going to see Concord had 75.25% of the enrollment, or 903 students, and Carlisle had 24.75, or 297. So the operating budget does not include debt or transportation. So you see that right at the top, the budget minus transportation and debt was $29,702,673. And what I did is I broke the revenue into 3 sections. So looking at the budget, the operating budget, we then reduced the amount by other state and local revenue. Therefore, the amount to assess above Chapter 70 in local revenue, so after the 3.5 that I showed you in the previous slide, the amount above Chapter 70 in local revenue to assess is $26,569,207, and it's broken up by the Concord portion and the Carlisle portion. And then it lines up with the next section, which is the transportation. So our transportation costs in this budget is $757,000. We were anticipating $531,000 coming from the state. Therefore, the delta of the $226,000 is assessed to the 2 towns. And then the last section is the debt. So if you add up all of the rows for Concord and Carlisle, it's going to look like this. So the assessment comparison without debt, with the superintendent's recommended budget, is an increase for Concord of 5.31% and for Carlisle of 6.51. So remember, that is with reducing E&D by the $339,000.
Revenue from E&D.
Reducing revenue, no, that's good. Reducing revenue, $339,000, which is further assessed to the towns, and in the general fund, $185K increase in OPEB. And then the next box is just the assessment comparison with debt, and for Concord it's 3.79%. So that is the first scenario that we're showing you all.
Wait, I'm sorry, can I just interrupt for a minute so I can understand this? So this first scenario, which is a 5.31% increase to Concord, includes using another $350,000 out of E&D, and it includes funding OPEB at the ARC. Got it. Thank you.
So the reason this is the recommended budget, we felt this was the most fiscally aggressive but fiscally sound recommendation. That obviously has a lot of discussion to be had on whether that's what everyone wants to do. But we felt like that's what we needed to present so it could be talked through.
So what we did for scenario number 2 is we wanted to see, okay, did the zero base really work? So what we did is we level funded the E&D revenue contribution from FY19 was $689,460. And we reduced the OPEB to level funded at $600,000, which is FY19's level. And you'll notice on the total budget at the bottom, that went down by $185,368 because OPEB is a general fund cost. So if we did only those two things, the assessments would be for Concord, without debt, would be under the guideline at 3.25%, without debt, and 2.04% with debt. So we took it one step further and proposed a third scenario. I just wanted to see what would it be, what would it look like if we met it halfway, if we reduced E&D between 350 and the 689, we came to 525, so cut it in half, and we met in the middle of the required ARC and FY19's contribution of 600,000. You can see that the total budget went down about 92,500 to 34,816,973, and then what it did with the assessments was it brought us within the Concord guideline, 4.26 without debt, and the assessment comparison with that is at 2.9%.
I'm sorry, what was the OPEB in that?
OPEB,
third
so
scenario?
in this scenario, it was roughly 692,000.
And 529,
525?
525?
For E&D.
So rather than saying that the difference between your, if you funded it the same way you did last year and what your plan is this year, is you're going to reduce the reliance on E&D and increase the amount of OPEB, increase the contribution towards the ARC OPEB.
At the end.
So that's the recommendation of topics for the school committee to talk about, and I felt that those are both school committee discussions as well as with both finance committees. So we wanted to be sure we presented the most.
And so if we were here, they would say, okay, give a little bit maybe to OPEB, but reduce the reliance on
Yes.
E&D for.
Yes,
I think so, yeah.
So did you try a scenario on that?
yeah.
That's what the third scenario is. So the third scenario is we met it in half. So instead of going from 689 to 350 for the E&D revenue, we went to the 525. And then for the OPEB contribution, instead of going up to the ARC, we split it. It was about 692.5, give or take. And therefore, what it did was is it brought the assessments down to 4.26 for Concord without debt assessment.
It feels like the message here that we're hearing from Moody's would probably bias this towards, you know, the same things just balanced the other way, like stay at 600 towards your OPEB liability and take that other 92,000 and throw it at your 525 E&D. And it would still be scenario 3, but it would just put more money, you know, you'd be taking less money out of E&D. I mean, it is what you're suggesting. So that one other thing, there was some discussion of a big budget driver that came up on the very first slide of this, which is the buy versus lease question regarding the laptop program, which is, you know, you can find $221,000 this year if you went to the lease, if that's my note, if my note here is correct.
That's certainly.
And that is another way to make this year make sense, but at some point in the future, you gotta pay the piper. I mean, you're gonna have these laptops on lease. So, is that?
That's correct.
So, any,
I don't understand the debt premium decrease of 207, is that a cash charge?
It's basically revenue. I didn't even have to include that on there, but I wanted to show that we had a 221 credit that decreased the assessments for debt.
So it's not just a change in market value based on what interest rates have done?
I don't want to give you the incorrect answer. Why don't I, but
You know the answer to that.
Is it the amortization of the premium into
It's a premium.
I believe so.
Oh, the premium on the bonds?
Yeah, they have a premium credit.
So they,
It's an offset to debt service, yeah.
their interest rate, the coupon's too high. Isn't that why you sell it at a premium? Because the coupon's higher than the market
Yep.
required?
Right.
Exactly. So you're paying a little bit more interest than you have to, but you sell it at a premium.
Right. And then you amortize that to income over the life of the
Exactly.
debt, which is what this is,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Anything else we can answer for you tonight?
I just have a general question, and this is about the costs of running the high school district, and how you allocate it between Concord and Carlisle. Like, there are a number of expenses we in Concord bear that, as far as I can tell, Carlisle doesn't, like the cost of the bus depot, which we built at the cost of $4 million a couple of years ago, cost of Ripley, and the school resource officer that the town of Concord pays, Emerson Field.
Beatty?
Beatty, I don't know if Beatty is
It is a
included too.
private.
School resource officer.
But anyways, is there something that you're doing to allocate that more fairly? Or is there something we should be talking about? Like, when we agreed to build that bus depot, there was a promise, I think, that rent would be paid.
I've heard that several times, so it's something we need to keep talking about, Phil. I definitely have heard it in my last 18 months from both Carlisle and Concord, so I think that's a discussion we can have. Ripley is shared, exclusively shared.
But
so-
it was contributed by Concord, it's our building, we built it.
Oh, in terms of the physical site
Yes,
itself?
yeah, like there are other things, like the fields that the high school uses, or the Emerson Field, the school resource officer that the town of Concord supplies. I mean, you add all that up, that's a couple $100,000. And, I don't know if that would be something that you could start a
Yeah, I think you'd have to
discussion
take each
about.
one of those at a time and talk on why it is the way it is, because I think, having talked with the police chief, I think there's some reasons that we're doing it the way we're doing it right now. We might not all agree on them, so we'd have to take them each on one thing, one
You did a
item
whole
at
list
time.
of those for us.
The town manager.
Yeah, no, I think the
Town
police
manager did
officer's the one we've talked the
showing it,
most
and
about.
The biggest one was a building permit that was,
Yeah.
basically just.
Yeah.
And he said he'd come back and say how other communities handled that, like Lincoln
Sort
Sudbury.
of benchmark it.
Benchmark it against other regional
Yeah.
high schools. So I think we're waiting for that.
I can follow up with him on
Yeah, that would be good.
that. Any other?
I just want to commend you. I think you have done a fabulous job on both budgets. It's so transparent. It's so great to hear the savings that you've already come up with, and it's great for your clear answers to everything we've asked tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, great.
Yeah, just quick question. Do you have a total of what the longevity payments are at the high school?
I do. Off the top of my head, I do not, but it's in the line item budget under longevity. So it would take me literally a minute to get. But
If I recall, the longevity payments at the high school are much more generous than those at the CPS. I don't know if that's still the same, but it would seem to me, knowing the unions, that they would go for parity, which is going to be another huge cost driver. And so I would just urge you guys to make sure you're diligent on that, not give away the farm, so we have another big number to overcome.
Well, thank you. I don't think we see any more. Any comments from the public? Okay.
Thank you for knowing
Thank
where
you.
the money comes from and where the money goes.
That's 100%. And I'll get you answers on that I've been thinking about the whole time, the road principle. It was just this way.
It's in the detail, it's in the detail, and it does seem to, the detail does appear to add up to the same number as the summary, so it's just a,
Triple check it.
it's a spreadsheet issue. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Poor Todd.
So now,
Todd.
our next item on the agenda is Todd Benjamin from the Affordable Housing Funding Committee. We just are looking forward to a summary of how that's going.
So, Mr. Chairman, since I serve on the Board of Directors of Emerson Hospital, I'm going to recuse myself from this portion of the...
Oh, that's
You're
right.
welcome to sit in the peanut gallery and listen.
No, please don't go home. We need it
Good,
for
yeah.
the rest of the year.
Please don't go home. Do come back. Okay.
Okay, well, thank you for having me tonight. It's good to be here and update you on what's transpired at the Select Board meeting on October 29th and then on October 13th. So there were two primary things that was mentioned to me to discuss, and that is any takeaways from the Select Board presentation on November 13th, and then what warrant articles. Sure. Yeah. And then what warrant articles. And what warrant articles our committee may be looking forward to putting forth. So essentially at the November 13th Select Board meeting, that was really a single topic meeting for the Select Board to talk about some of our recommendations. And we recommended 4 things, which you may have seen. Essentially those recommendations are the annual budget line item, the building permit fee surcharge, the local real estate transfer fee surcharge, and the payments in lieu of taxes, the pilot. So some of the feedback that we received from the Select Board is that they like that differentiated approach. Part of the reason we took that approach was that 2 of those options can be implemented immediately, and 2 of those options would have to potentially go through state legislation. So that's why we looked at those 4 options. We also looked at those 4 options as a way to kind of share the burden of supporting affordable homes across the community. We didn't want to overweight one aspect of our community too much. We wanted to try to share this and make sure that everybody had a stake in this endeavor. So the Select Board commented on that. They liked that approach. They also mentioned some things that we had looked at in the past. They mentioned the idea of bonds, of utilizing a bond to kind of bring forward some revenues so that we could implement affordable housing faster. So that's something that they showed some interest in. They did not seem too optimistic on the pilot, the payment in lieu of taxes. I think part of that from the feedback that I heard was that had been something that had been implemented in the past or had been tried to be implemented in the past. Our approach was different. We were looking at 6 entities. One of them is Harvard, that is obviously based in Cambridge. The other 5 were based in Concord, and they would be Emerson Hospital, Middlesex, Fenn, Concord Academy, Neshoba, and I think that's it.
Middlesex?
Those 5. Sorry?
Middlesex?
Yeah, Middlesex.
Is that it? Okay,
Yep,
sorry.
okay. I'm sorry if I didn't, Middlesex. So I think our focus on pilot was a little bit different than maybe what had been the focus before. But nonetheless, that was that. One thing that the Select Board mentioned some interest in is, I guess at the state legislature, there's an opportunity for localities to add a optional meal tax. So I have to confess I don't know that much about this, but this was something that seemed to be of interest to them. That's right, yeah. Yeah, and I guess from my understanding and listening to their comments is that I guess when a municipality adds this extra meal tax, they get to keep the revenue from that meal tax, I guess. When our committee reconvened after the meeting, our thought on that was, well, geez, it seems like we're kind of hitting the small enterprises disproportionately than other enterprises. I mean, it kind of seemed a little bit interesting. Why would we add another tax to the places that residents and visitors eat in and dine in, but yet when we have these large entities that are wealthy and that are not paying taxes, we don't ask them to contribute. So, well, we'll see how that plays out. But that's some of the feedback that we received from the Select Board. And that kind of dovetails into the warrant article issue. The way that we left it, or the way that the select board left it, is that they were going to look into some of these issues. And so our committee stands ready to support and to be of use in any way possible for warrant articles, but our charge is to put forth the recommendations, put forward the report, and so we fulfilled that aspect of our charge. And if we can help in moving forward these issues, then that's great. We're ready to do that. As you're probably aware, this is really a key time to be discussing these issues. I think a lot of attention has started to focus on affordable housing for a lot of different reasons, but especially because of some of the projects that are happening really at our doorstep in Sudbury and in Acton, Maynard, where you're looking at about 500 units of housing coming in. So I think that's something that has gotten the select board's attention, and hopefully we can utilize that momentum and make some headway here and really bring something forward at town meeting. Of course, the initial thought was that we would bring something to town meeting last year. However, our first meeting was not until September 26th of 2017, so there's no way that we would have been able to go through all of this and be ready for a town meeting then. So hopefully now is the right time, and we can move forward and get some warrants. I think the focus would be, or the approach would be, to have multiple warrants, so that one idea, if it did not pass muster, it didn't kill the entire approach. So that's something that the select board also spoke about, as well as looking at that approach. So that's the synopsis from the November 13th meeting. Happy to answer any questions, provide any other insight that I can provide.
Which of the options requires legislative action at the State House?
So that would be the real estate transfer tax, or the real estate surcharge, and also the building permit fee surcharge. There are precedents for those in terms of other communities have successfully done those things. Let's see, in terms of the building permit fee surcharge, that does require state legislative approval, and then the local transfer tax, that is something that, looking here to see if, I think there are some, I know what it is. Some other municipalities in Massachusetts have done that for open space and for land banks, not so much for affordable housing, but it's in the same ballpark, if you will. So we're optimistic that precedent would bode well for what we're looking at doing.
In their summary descriptions, transfer surcharge makes sense to me. You sell a property and there's something tacked on to that transaction based on the valuation of the transaction, and that comes into. But the building fee surcharge, we had a proposal at town meeting last year, which was quite detailed. It had to do with, if anything over X thousand feet for new structures would start to be very expensive, and then for, I don't know, if you're adding on to your home, was your proposal similar to what we had heard, which was this kind of complicated formulaic approach to the building permit fee? What's your thinking on that?
Sure. So our thinking in that, and we certainly looked at that and kind of used that as a benchmark, if you will. So we deviated from that in terms of not looking at just purely a square foot kind of approach, but really looking at the value of the enhancement of the construction and looking at it that way. So, for example, let me see if I've got a good handy example here to show you. Refer to my preliminary report that we did for the select board. So in this regard, let's see here. So what we have currently is a base permit fee of $12 per $1,000. And we used a couple of different examples. So if there was a $20,000 new bathroom that somebody was putting into their home, they would still have that surcharge, that base fee of $12 per 1,000, so that would be $240. But then there would be a surcharge rate, which is what we're talking about, which would be $9 per $1,000 of kind of value of what you're doing. And so that would be, in this case, $180. That would be the surcharges.
Total permit fee charge would be
$21.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
And there was no threshold above a certain total dollar amount that this would apply, and less than, say if you're putting a shack out and back or something, 5,000, I don't know, you wouldn't have to pay for that.
The one thing that we noticed,
In the previous proposal, I thought there was, the thing about it was that it was sort of taking that construction, the housing that was raising the cost of housing in Concord and taxing that. And I thought that was kind of, some people objected to that, but I thought that was,
Yeah.
had certain benefit to it.
Right, right. The one area that, that we would not, that this would not apply to would be for affordable homes already. So if somebody had an affordable home and they were, if it was a deed restricted home and there were some renovations or some enhancements that needed to be done to that this wouldn't apply to that. But we felt that this was a progressive approach where we have a sliding scale. So that, for example, that $9 per 1,000 that I mentioned, if it was a $20,000 bathroom addition, well, if somebody were to do a $1.5 million home, then that surcharge would be $20 per $1,000. So we felt that progressive nature,
Wouldn't be progressive.
right, would speak to, would kind of speak to that.
As far as the bond issue goes, I think there was a legal question about whether we can, in fact, raise money through bonds for affordable housing. And I know that, Carrie, you were looking into that. But the other question I have is, if you were to raise money through a bond, would that be tied to a specific revenue stream, or would it be against the general fund?
Well, in the select boards, in their conversation, it seemed that initially, and I can't speak for them, but that was kind of the question that we were wondering about as well.
Right.
But it did seem that it would be part of the general obligation of the town. But I don't know how the select board how their thinking on that has evolved or has developed on that. But I think ideally it would be great if some of these recommendations were implemented, and then those revenue streams could support the debt service on the bond. But it almost seemed as if the select board was implying, let's bring forward a bond or some kind of short-term funding to get things to get the process moving. And in that case, it seemed like it would be on the general fund or the general obligation of the town.
So I'm sorry, go
ahead,
ahead.
go ahead,
You
go ahead.
finish it, yeah.
No, go ahead.
So how much are you trying to raise again? It was a couple of $1 million, I remember. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. We were looking at about $4 to $5 million was the area.
Per year?
That's right, yeah.
Per year. And so if you were to go with multiple warrants, so how are you going to divide it up across those? Are you going to say, if 2 of them succeed, I'm going to divide the revenue needs by 2? How are you going to deal with multiple warrants? I'm just trying to understand it. So if it would be, in other words, the rate would be X if only 1 item passed.
Right.
And the rate would be very different if 4 of them passed, right? The actual rate of tax or the fee, whatever it is you're going to do. So how will that work at the meeting? How will you, after the meeting, how does that get figured out?
Right,
Yeah.
and again, this will depend on how the select board ultimately decides how they want to move forward with it. But,
Okay.
for example, if there was the annual budget line item, if that was something that was a standalone warrant article and that was approved, then that would equal about $916,000 in revenue. If that was not approved, then there would be a deficit of that amount. The same thing with the real estate.
Okay, so you wouldn't seek to get the 5 million
Right.
anyway. It's going to be divided up, and some warrants may pass and some won't. So you could
That's-
end up with $1 million or 5 million.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, that's how I envision it. Again,
Yeah.
the select board has, obviously wide discretion in terms of how they bring forward the warrant articles, how they want to craft those. But that is how we in the Affordable Housing Funding Committee, how we discussed it and how we thought it may play out, or if we were part of that, how we might look at putting that forward.
Okay, thank you.
So Todd, the other idea I thought that they were kicking around was looking at any excess in the free cash percent. Does that still have legs, or is that something that we're not?
Well, that's an interesting one. You just never know how these things are going to come back and evolve, because we had talked about that, and then we kind of, as a committee, put that to the back burner. So we were kind of surprised that the select board seemed to look back. They kind of looked at the appendix, it seems, and kind of said, well, we like these 2 things, let's bring them forth.
It is.
So, we were surprised that they were interested in the bonding and in the free cash. I have not heard any other comments on that from the select board, so I can't speak to how their thinking is, where their thinking is now about that. But yeah, as a committee, we were surprised about that. And when we met, just to kind of do an after-action report and kind of touch base with everybody, that was the consensus. We said, wow, we were kind of surprised that they went to those 2 things. So.
Are you still working with them, or is it now in their court? Is that?
It's now in their
Okay.
court, but if we can help and if we can support the process in any way, where we're all, stand ready to do that. So it's a matter of, just kind of keeping in touch with them and making sure that they have the information that they need. And if there's something that we can do to continue it, then by all means, we're certainly happy to do that. The last thing that I think any of us want is to see nothing happen with this. I mean, we've all, as a community, we've discussed for many years that something needs to occur in terms of supporting affordable housing. And with Charles Phillips bringing forward his warrant article, which I think you were referring to previously with the building fee, I think that was an important and necessary step to get us to where we are now. And now we're really at the point of, is Concord, are we as a community, as a town, are we going to be committed in really seeing this forward and seeing this through? So hopefully now is the time where we can actually do that.
Todd, how does your committee's vision of the town's contributions to such a fund vary over time?
It would be, I think if I understand your question, you're saying if we were fortunate enough to get $4 or $5 million, in 5 subsequent years, and then, I mean, one of the things with the annual budget line item that our committee discussed is that this is something that could be implemented easily. We don't have to go through state legislature. That would be a town meeting kind of thing, and it would be great if that was something that was perhaps implementable or implemented in the first few years, and then perhaps dropped in the subsequent years. If we did have something like that, if we did have a fund or almost an endowment fund of assets built up where perhaps we didn't need to continuously come back to the town with that. So that would be one example of where we could perhaps drop that out of the equation because we have funds available to meet the need. So.
The one thing that our committee worries about regarding the budget line item approach is that it'll bump up against our levy limit. And because it'll have a big clawing effect on our levy limit reserve. And if we do that for a few years running, we're going to be done.
It has an effect on the affordability of living in
Concord.
Well, so does the free cash option.
Yeah.
They all do.
Right, same kind of thing.
Well, and to that point, in terms of the free cash option, some of the comments that we heard was, well, why not just do an annual budget line item? And so as we started to look at that, we certainly didn't want to do both. Free cash and annual budget line item because we think that would overburden the taxpayer too much. And the last thing that we want to do is to increase the property taxes, which is part of the reason affordable housing is such an issue as it is. That we have many people in our community who struggle to pay the property taxes. So we certainly don't want to add to that burden, which again, I think our committee really kind of scratched their head a little bit and said, well, wait a minute, we want to do something that is equitable and across the board here, and we don't want to put the burden on the property taxes. So we were kind of struggling to understand why the select board, as of now, is not interested in looking at pilot, where you have 6 entities who do not pay any taxes, and they're wealthy entities. I mean, when we look at, and you can see it in the report when we break it down in terms of the property taxes that they would pay as a percentage of net assets or as a percentage of endowment, surely we would hope that they would feel invested in contributing to the community in that way. Right, and many,
You did.
yeah.
You did a great job, too.
Many times, Massachusetts is a leader in investigating or putting forth property, payment in lieu of taxes.
Yeah, you were very remarkable. You did a good job.
Any further questions? Any questions from the public? Okay. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Okay. So the next item on our agenda, I'm really going to turn to my chair here, Mr. Tarpey, who's really pressing on with our sustainable rate of taxation growth, or the SRTG conversation that we are, barreling towards some sort of conclusion. And I think we need to
Summon Mr. Hickling back.
Yes, is Mr. Hickling in the hall? Can he be?
I did miss these in the select. Did you see that I got that done for you? Right, so are these, you have these available to
I
pass out?
do, I don't have enough, so I'm gonna have to have Carrie make us a few copies.
Okay.
But otherwise, yes, they're there. I probably have 6 or 8. My printer was just going one every couple of minutes, and you gave me a tough assignment, Tom, so
I knew you were up to it.
You know, actually, that's not the current one.
Well, it's not the current.
No, we added the 10-year treasury bill to the line, and, you don't have the current one. These are as of 6:45 this evening. So, I probably have about 8 of these, so.
We can
You
share.
can make some of these. I'm gonna, well, it's probably gonna be okay. The lines have labels at the end.
If it'll do both sides, so much the
Yeah.
better, but
Yeah, so pass these around, maybe one every other person, and then we'll get a black and white one.
I'll look on with you.
Exactly, you can look on with me.
You can have one.
So this is really Carl's baby, and
Do you guys need
I
some
messed
down
with
there?
it, Carl. Yeah, you guys want
Oh,
to
wait,
share one every
we
other
don't have,
person?
we need one.
Oh, we need one more?
Yep, please.
There
Thank
go.
you.
And Anita's gonna get some copies up for us. But,
Trying to get John.
Oh, you didn't tell me,
He's coming. What? Were you trying to reach John?
No, I was trying to reach you.
Oh, me? I'm right here.
Left me a message.
okay, do we know, did John leave the building? I think he said he was leaving. Yeah, he put his hat on like he was going, and I'm like, no, you can't leave.
You know, I thought he said he was going to,
You're on your own, Tom. Go ahead.
just a second,
You can do it.
I'm just gonna see if I can get Mr. Hickling to say whether he's coming back.
He's recusing himself for the rest of the meeting. Thank you. Oh, look at that. They are in color. Wow, that's a fancy, you got fancy services here. Okay, whoever needs one, how about if I pass half of them in either direction? All right.
John, it's Tom Tarpey. Are you coming back? Please text or call to let us know. All right. Bye.
All right.
Okay,
Here are the
so
extra ones going
I
that
think
way.
the supposition is that he is not coming back. Yep.
Send those along. Okay.
All right. I would like to start this discussion by asking, did everyone receive the notice this afternoon that we have scheduled a meeting on this very topic alone for Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock? Such a notice went out in a timely fashion in order to meet the open meeting law requirements. I would like to get a sense of how many would be able to join us on Wednesday evening for that. So if you, this Wednesday, and we also have a meeting on Thursday, that's right. Right. And we're
tonight.
meeting tonight,
And we're
that's
here.
right.
I know.
We are trying to bring this issue.
Soccer season's over, so.
I got all kinds of time now.
Why can't we have it on Thursday night along with the regular meeting?
I think it's going to take more time than we will have than on Thursday.
But you have, with no announcements or anything like that, you're not going to have many people attending.
Well, first of all, can people say, if you would raise your hands and say who would be able to come on Wednesday?
Maybe. Kid in the
I
house.
can't.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Anybody down that end? Potentially 6. Okay, it's not a vote. We're not going to vote on anything. So we don't need a quorum. And I think we should forge ahead and have it. But the object of the meeting would be to come to a consensus about what we would vote on Thursday, and that would be how to formulate, how to describe numerically by using the various indices we have been discussing, how the sustainable growth rate would be set over a specified 5-year term. I think we've all agreed that it's a good idea to put a 5-year term out there and change it every year as necessary. As economic conditions change in the local economy and in the national economy, we would revisit that set of 5 numbers that we put out there on an annual basis. So it wouldn't be the number for year 5 or fiscal year 24 wouldn't be set in concrete. It would be something that might change in fiscal year 20 when we get to that point and we say, oh, well, conditions are changed, we're going to alter the numbers for fiscal 24. So
Did we take a vote, or we had talked about using the 5-year, well, it was the Treasury bill, and it was kind of vague as to what it was. And we had talked, did we ever take a vote on that in a meeting? I mean, we did discuss that several.
We were pretty close to the 10-year, if I recall.
yes,
As,
the
as
10
being-
years.
and that's the line that I added to
Okay,
this
10-year,
chart,
fine.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay, the reason why I thought the 5-year was that, A, it's 5 years, and we're doing a 5-year segment, and B, is that the interest rate on that, the interest is every, year by year, and the interest is received year by year, whereas the 10 years, but, you get the money at the end.
Right, but of course, it's not the interest rate on
The
the,
imputed,
it's the yield,
it's a yield, exactly.
so which changes day by day.
Yes, it does, yep.
The interest rate
It's not the
is,
coupon,
is
it's the-
set
yeah.
and fixed, but the yield differs on a
Yes.
daily basis depending upon
You're right,
how people view the economy.
right. Yes.
And it is the 10-year T-bill that is most widely to be believed to be an accurate indicator of the future rather than the 5-year bill. For whatever reason, I'm not.
Diverges more widely from the CPI that,
Well, you're putting money at risk for a longer period of time on, when you invest it, so.
So you want a premium?
Consensus view of what the future rate of inflation is going to be. So in 10-year Treasury bills, you're looking out further, and it's the market's best prognostication of what the long-term rate of inflation is at any given time.
So I guess Tom and I were at the select board on the previous Monday. Was that?
1 week ago
Yeah,
today.
a week ago today. And they were intrigued by the idea, but there was some hesitancy on their part to buy into this concept at all, that we would have a projection that we would be anticipating them to. And I thought Tom described it very well. He said, the annual process that we go through of discussing an individual budget and what we need and how it's a black art.
and it's reactive.
And it's reactive. And what this is trying to do is to instruct or to inform the budgeting entities to be aware that this is what the town can really afford or reasonably afford. And so keep your budgeting process and specifically your long-term commitments keep those long-term commitments in line with this. And, obviously the thing that comes up is your labor contracts. When you make a labor contract that's 3 years long, that does make a commitment for the future. And if it's in line with the sustainable growth rate, then everybody's good. But if it's not, then you've now boxed us in, and we as the finance committee will have you come to us in the next 2 or 3 years, telling us I can't, my hands are tied. So if we're able to at least provide some guidance to, you know, to these budgeting entities, that this is what we would expect to be reasonable, that's the whole point of this exercise. I think, am I missing the point
No,
there? You know?
Yeah, the point
That's
was to
exactly how I
make
put
sure
it.
that our increases in the budgets aren't bankrupting
Right.
the
Tax base.
the tax.
Are sustainable.
They're sustainable.
Yeah, so I think I sat in, just attended it, so I think that's correct. I think Tom made the points that we were looking to make.
Right.
I think they had questions on these indices, and so they were they were asking questions about income quintiles, right? So some of the discussion we've had here. So, can you tell me what this really means to the people who live in our town from an income perspective? But of course, we haven't found a way to do that. We talked about how we
Well, at a
tried.
minimum, it's a better deal than what we've been doing.
Oh, sorry, what's that?
Any one of the indices
Yes, yes.
Is
is
better than
more
nothing.
affordable to the homeowner in Concord
Right.
than the path we've been taking.
Yeah.
And I get concerned because over time I've watched us get caught up in debating about which is the most valuable proxy and throwing, this conversation goes no place while
Yeah.
we allow ourselves to be dragged into a debate about which index. And it diverts attention away from the bigger problem, which is this ever-growing gap because we generate so many fabulous ideas and projects to fund.
Right. I'm just telling you what their reaction
Oh,
was.
I know, but
It wasn't, oh, this is fabulous, let's
No,
go
no,
do
it was
this.
not.
That was not the reaction. I just want to be clear. You had a great idea, June, which was to go see what they say. And the answer
Well,
was,
the
isn't that
answer-
interesting?
It
Why
is
don't you talk
interesting, but
people about it? So,
like any guideline or boundary, none of us wants to bump up against like be told that there's a limit and that,
Yeah.
we need to operate
no,
within.
I'm not saying we don't do
Oh,
it.
I know, but it just,
But it wasn't embraced.
it's not dissimilar to the reaction as observer comments when Dean presented to the school committee.
Right.
And it was gonna be further discussed and interesting, but starting to quibble about define your terms.
Yeah.
We'll be back there tomorrow. So,
Right. So I think June's point is an excellent one, and that is, well,
We say the 10-year is the most generous,
it appears to be the most generous
it
of
is,
these lines.
it is.
so, we could argue you into the ground about the CPI or something, but I guess that, this being my 6th cycle, that it's concerning that we go through this every year and we dig for more and more data, and that just seems to drive more and more questioning of the data as opposed to looking at the bigger picture, which is this top line is accelerating and continue to accelerate, and we have passionate citizens who have all kinds of great ideas, and they cost money, and we watch this and see that the levy limit's gonna get bumped up against, the E&D at the high school continues to be drawn down, and that we, sit here among ourselves and talk about it, but it just doesn't get traction beyond
And
the
we
walls.
talk about debt issuances so that we can
Right.
have affordable housing, which would just,
Exactly.
cause the
Ironic.
town, so
It's,
it's,
yes,
We
it's,
pay
it's,
for it, we pay interest.
we'll pay interest on it.
it's ironic.
So,
That's the word, yes.
Could you speak up, Grace, because you always have interesting things. No, that's not going to help, but, use it, but,
Well, I was just thinking that when you're negotiating with for these contracts, the labor contracts, for instance, it usually, at least in my experience in managing outside vendors, when they knew you had an internal long-term guideline in terms of your increases, that was often very persuasive to them in terms of being more reasonable. Or, if you sort of said, well, over the 3 years, we can't go above this limit, it's a lot more persuasive than we can pick any number because ultimately you'll just agree to it, right? I mean, that's something else that it's a different view of it, which is sort of like, well, it's helping you with people that you're negotiating with,
Right.
saying, hey, our town is trying to be fiscally responsible, look at what it's doing to our citizens. Some of these citizens are potentially you, and you know, the people that you're protecting, right?
So it's troubling to hear that the reaction is, well, my hands are really going to be tied when I come back with a contract that has me, you know, pushing a number above that 10-year, and that that their view isn't that this is helpful in managing expectations across the board, and wages are our biggest.
Well, I think the school committee, I mean, has
Driver.
been supportive of having some sort of a long-range look at what the parameters are for their budget increases. They've said it.
They certainly haven't argued against that. I don't know, as I've heard them.
No, I heard Wally say, and I think Heather, Bob nodded.
Yeah. Okay.
But at the last school committee meeting, it was said that, well, this doesn't work because the steps are 7%. So the answer to that is you might have to redraw that grid and come within it, as opposed to, this is wonderful, but I can't live with it. I don't, you know, we seem to be caught at a loggerheads, but hopefully on our side doing a better job of articulating the situation.
So are they suggesting that because Concord incomes are higher than the other areas, that this curve here is immaterial? Because that's sort of bootstrapping the whole idea, isn't it? Of being an exclusive community.
Concord is not a CPI town, okay, remember that.
Well, I mean, a CPI is questionable in a lot of ways, right? Because it's often driven by particular commodities, but, I mean, the 10-year is pretty good, and it is the most generous.
So Grace, the conversation that leads us into, which the select board tried to draw us into, is do you have a sense of, like, as they look at this number going up and they have this sense that the town has a tremendous capacity to, you know, to pay these taxes, that they can see the amount of generosity that flows into land organizations and arts organizations and athletic organizations, and somehow not affordable housing organizations, but hey, you know, they see this kind of sheer capacity to fund these things, and they go, well, maybe this isn't so bad. Can you give us some sense of how the incomes break out within the town? And I think it's kind of getting us deep into the weeds that we may not be able to support from a data perspective, but it may also be some sense that I have, at least, that we're facing within our own town this income disparity, which is rife within the country, where people at certain points within the, you know, the income quintiles in the town of Concord they're either on fixed incomes or their incomes are not rising that much, and there are others who are just on a skyrocket to the moon, and this disparity is something that we need to wrestle with and understand how to contain the tax burden on those for whom the incomes are not necessarily going up at a high rate. So, and we don't, the problem that we have is that we don't really have great data to support this hunch.
Well, you can also use the different, you don't have to choose a line or a index. For example, you could say, okay, cost of living increases should not be more than the CPI. Right, and you can pick whatever particular gauge of the CPI you want to use, whether it's chained, unchained,
Yeah, except
whatever.
the cost of living increases is only the small part of the whole overall increase.
True, but it is a component. It is a component, and in past years, we've seen contracts where with a 0 inflation rate, they're getting a 2.5%, 2.75% COLA. Right, so how do you, that's not really a cost of living increase, that's
No, it's just,
whatever you want to call it, it's like free money.
Yeah, but
The
it's
negotiated,
back
it's a
to-
negotiated raise.
Yeah.
So why is the divergence really begins in 11, 12? What's driving that?
I think that, 11 and 12.
There was some real restraint after the financial meltdown. The town had, like, they brought a budget, I think in 2008, which was like a 0% increase budget. I mean, there was some real restraint. And then there was this catch-up, oh, we have to catch up, especially in the schools, it was like, hey, we restrained ourselves, now we have some catch-up years to do here.
It may also be when we started the debt stabilization fund for the high school. If we went and dug, but
And 2007 was kind of one reason too, I mean, yeah, the angle, but we arbitrarily picked 2007 as a starting date, and so they all start there, if you understand what I'm saying, and go out from there, so they could have been, all these could have been down here somewhere. Actually, I mean, this is based on the actual tax bill, whereas these are the rates of increase of these particular lines, which aren't even, the same kind of number. They're not really comparable to the tax bill.
Yeah, if you'd gone back
Yeah.
many years, another 10 years back, maybe they diverged again.
Yeah.
But over that period, all three operating budgets have been growing at similar, the cumulative average growth rate, so if I compute a geometric growth rate, they're not all that different for the town, the schools, the region. And then some of what's happening is outside the guidelines process.
Right.
And it's the non-guidelines items like medical insurance, and then
Debt.
all of the excluded debt
Excluded debt.
that's been growing as well. So it's not an exercise at finger pointing about any particular bad guy. We've been doing it across the board.
So we replaced all our schools except for the middle school.
We have,
recently.
and that's coming up.
No debt.
And that's coming up.
We started funding open.
So we're gonna go,
That was a huge number.
Well, I think when we come right down to it, there's going to be a certain amount of arbitrariness. We're going to have to choose an index to which we want to peg our sustainable growth rate. And in the interest of moving this off top dead center, I'll just throw out here that we stipulate that our sustainable growth rate is going to be the arithmetic average of the 5-year rolling average of the regional CPI, whichever one we can find that's closest to our defined region, and the 10-year T-bill yield on the third Wednesday in November.
I second that motion, and
Those would be the two
And
zones.
I-
Those are the guardrails.
No, I was being serious.
No, those are the guardrails. Those are the guardrails?
see the average.
This is the sustainable growth rate. So when you say guardrail, we have been talking about
average of the 5-year,
rolling average
A 5-year rolling
of,
average.
of the regional CPI, which comes closest to approximating our economic region.
That's the one guardrail, right?
no, it's not, he's
gonna be an average of the
he's
two.
averaging that 5-year with the 10-year T-bill.
Right,
So
so
he's-
it's a single line.
okay.
And it's going to be the same number for 5 years.
So to avoid a meeting on Wednesday night, I move that we approve Tom's proposed guideline.
Work up what that would look like and then
Yeah,
come
how do we
back to that.
explain that? How do we
That's-
explain
that's-
that?
It would be
I
nice to,
think-
to
That's
just
sort of what I,
see what that line would be.
yeah, I'd
in
really like to
real
do some
chart
research
or
and
something.
have the meeting, but it might only be 4 of us on Wednesday night, or
Right.
6, however many want to show
It
up.
might be that it's,
And it might only be a half an hour long.
and maybe a zone, we can talk about a zone concept as well, that we would want to see us not be dropping down below that, that maybe this,
Use those as the upper and lower limits?
yeah, that you would hope that we would be growing by CPI, so that we were maintaining level service, as, with the expenses growing with inflation, and we wouldn't want to see we wouldn't want to be going beyond the 10-year, and that there's this,
Because right now, we don't know which is higher.
no, they could potentially flop around at times, but that's an issue too.
Right.
So it could be the greater of,
Right.
either of those numbers, but.
I have to just throw in my 2 cents on CPI. The CPI does not seem to me to be a great measure of the acquisition of town services. CPI is how much are you paying for gasoline and other goods that you can acquire as a consumer. I just don't see how that really is that
Well,
instructive.
in a way, it's a measure of affordability because it's what the market can
Yeah,
bear.
it's-
I mean,
It's what the town has to pay for the people that are doing the services, and what
Yeah.
those people
But
are paying.
the CPI actually is not it's not an employment cost kind of thing. It's the cost of buying a washing machine or
Yeah, but it's what the market prices.
Right, so in the rest of the world, when you're talking about raises, if they're, not merit-based, if they're related to inflation, people are using CPI.
because it's what the market will bear.
It is.
Yeah.
because that person is
People can't
ultimately a
afford it.
consumer, and you have to make them whole, and make them feel like they can go
So
back and,
that's what's used,
Yeah,
so I think that's
it's
pretty
to keep you level, isn't it? Keep your buying power at level.
Okay, all right.
So to your point, Dean, is this line with the employment cost, where is that?
That comes from the National Compensation Survey. Paul has a fabulous spreadsheet where he sucked that down, and it's regionalized. It's within the county.
Regionalized, this particular, it is also particularized for different jobs.
Right.
Doctor to
Within the
plumber.
region?
Within the region, but this line, there's a cumulative number, and this was the cumulative number for that. And it's the region, there's
like-
pretty much the same, there's a region for Lowell and Chelmsford, and there's a region for Boston, Newton, and Cambridge, and
We're in that one.
that's the one I picked.
I guess I would just think we want to think of our audience and keep it simple so that we avoid the getting into, well, why did you pick that number and why did you take the 10 average? And so, I don't know, I'm already feeling like it's getting a little bit too complicated to clearly articulate to the people you're trying to convince.
Well, the way I would explain the use of the particular two indices that I chose is that the 5-year rolling average of the regional CPI is a lagging indicator, and whereas the 10-year T-bill yield is a leading indicator.
And that's true.
And that was my simple-minded rationale for choice of those two.
And I like the idea of a single number. I think having, guardrails on either side
hurricane
is
cone.
going to mean that people say, okay, we don't have to use these at all. So
Yep.
if you have a simple one number, easy to understand,
That's a
whether
good
it's
point.
Yeah.
Tom's average or something else,
Sounds
it's easier.
fine. Yep, I agree.
So that
That's a good
single
point, and
number
it's
is
projectable.
it's not a variable, it's not like we have 5 different numbers for the next 5 years. We just have a number, and we expect
Yeah.
that any plans you make.
And we
whether
stick
it's
it
a-
out 5
We
years.
stick it out 5 years, but we say any plans you make, whether it's a 1-year purchase or a 3-year contract negotiation, this is the number you want to be keeping front of mind.
The only detail, the date, November.
Yeah, it's the.
Well,
It was just arbitrary.
I was envisioning this, I had a reason.
Oh, you
So,
do?
right, so I didn't just pull it out of my armpit.
So, what is
Pretty
it?
close. But, no, I envision this as something that we would do, we being the Finance Committee, as it goes through the ages, on an annual basis, right around this time of year.
Around this time, okay. the
And-
guidelines.
So you would
Right.
set it now for use in building 21? I mean, they're gonna wanna know.
20, I would put this out for 20.
We should have
too
done,
late.
we
So,
should
but
have
we're-
done it.
But you
We're
would be
too late.
late.
We're too
So
late
that you
for
need to,
20.
like, when you're setting the guideline letter, say that the number
This is the
has
number we're
been set.
expecting.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're too
And
late for 20.
not with, you've done all this work and now we're gonna look at the, I mean,
I mean,
it may
actually-
be as subject to, a significant market fluctuation, which if something did happen, everyone would expect to respond to that anyhow. But
Right.
I would think that they're gonna, for it to be useful to the budgeting entities.
We would send out the guideline information.
The first
Letter, it
First
just
letter.
says, this is our guideline number, this is our target number. and
So it should be based on
So
something,
it should be on that date.
June or July, yeah.
So the
Well-
date for choosing it should be July 1st. Okay.
By the time the letters go out, it's July 30th.
Yeah, it's also the
Okay.
beginning of the fiscal year, right?
All right.
Yeah.
And this would be something, the 5-year line would be revised annually.
Right.
Right, we'd vote on it, and before that letter goes out, we'd come up with what's the next one, which would...
So Tom, can you say again what you proposed? The 5, go ahead.
So the sustainable growth rate
Yep,
for the next 5 years, for
Yes.
each one of the next 5 years,
Yep.
shall be defined as the arithmetic average of the 5-year rolling average of the regional CPI, subject to better definition, and the 10-year T-bill yield as it existed on the first Wednesday in July, if that happens to be a day when the market is trading.
First Wednesday in July.
Right,
Could well be the 4th, though.
exactly, right.
4th of July, that would be
I
the
second-
next
Or
business
as close thereto as possible.
I second that. I think we should vote on it. I think we can vote on it tonight. I don't know if we need to have a discussion, and we can always revisit it again, but this is our first stab at it, and it sounds pretty good.
yeah, it does.
Okay, well, having gotten lucky, let me,
Keep going.
let me bring up something else. So, that relates to this.
Are we gonna vote?
I
You need a second, you want to vote?
I think that this ought to be, this practice ought to be codified. I think it's something that the Finance Committee should do.
We're voting on it.
Well, we're doing it this year. What
Right,
Tom's
but-
getting at is how do we make it part of our policy, or is it something that the town should?
Yeah, we could also move that
And
we
in our
we
report.
establish this, and that we establish this as a policy of the Finance Committee going forward.
Amended motion. I second that, too.
Man, he is getting lucky. Okay.
Okay.
Skillful.
You're gonna have to put it into the
Any discussion on that? Anybody take issue with that concept or support it or?
The only,
Sounds good.
the only thing
Sound
I'd love to
fiscal
do is just
management.
calculate what that would mean. What would we be proposing for this year, just to see what it would be? But I can do that after we vote, and we can decide this is it, and then vote something else later and change
Yeah,
it.
Sure.
If it comes in at 7.5,
We can do that. It's
It's
instructive.
not, I looked at the chart.
I know, if
It's
it's,
gonna be
And I
lower.
have to-
right,
so
I know,
you-
but
you're gonna
come
have a
back and
number
tell
that's
us, and then we'll,
The past 5 years,
we
right?
can
or
always
whatever, 5-year
revise
average
it.
of the CPI, so you can do the math. And you're gonna have the treasury rate at a certain time.
let's
And
say
then
if it's
you're
too
gonna
high.
have one number.
Right.
When you say you're gonna put it for the next 5 years, it's gonna be the same
It's the
number.
same
Same
number.
number,
It's the same number.
right.
Okay.
It'll be updated each year.
Why do we have to do that, though? So that's for the contracts, I get you. Okay.
There is one, there is
Something to
one,
work
Right.
with.
I will
Now-
bring up one caveat, and that is that the CPI number, if you're gonna go back for the last 5 years, that's been unusually low.
Low, right, yeah.
So you're gonna end up with an unusually
Zero
low
on one side.
number
Yeah.
when you combine the two. And it's just the anomaly of that the inflation's been so low.
Why you want to integrate a backward-looking thing into something we're trying to use as a forward-looking projection. That's just not obvious to me, that's all.
Well, I think I realize the CPI might have been artificially low or unusually low, but it's what people understand and people will be familiar with. And I think that
it
Tom's proposal of averaging that with the forward-looking T-bill rate sort of balances that, the effect of the,
Well-
whatever the CPI has.
We could meet Dick's concern, which I think is a valid one in this particular case, by simply making it the most recent whole year CPI.
Yeah,
Rather than the 5-year rolling average.
yeah. I think that would work better.
I don't know, I mean, the 5-year rolling average thing will adjust itself
Over time, but
It might take too long to be useful.
So since we're having this discussion tonight rather than Thursday night, and
Tomorrow night.
Wednesday night, we could come up with some numbers to show what would be representative this year if we were publishing the sustainable growth rate for this year, 5 years out, and discuss those numbers on Thursday.
Yeah, we could discuss those on Thursday.
And either vote then or change it, or,
I do think we can certainly come to a vote at the Thursday meeting. I would prefer to lay this on the table, so to speak, because it would be nice to just have some calculations in front of us to see what this would look like. And then we can, because I don't see any reason why we can't vote. We're ready to vote tonight. I just feel as though if we got a visual on it, it would just, it would give us.
Well, if it's any help, the adjustment to Social Security, I think, is going to be about 2.88. Right, and the 10-year Treasury bill is about 3.1. So right now, they're both pretty close to each other.
Okay, all right. Well, I can vote tonight. We can do it.
well, there'd be no problem voting tonight and then changing it on Thursday if we saw some numbers. And,
Crazy, okay.
How about we vote on a tentative proposal tonight, and then we'll revisit it on Thursday? This way we have some action.
We have a stand-in.
This is a good point, because we're just the guidelines committee.
We are just
tonight.
the guidelines
Maybe as the-
committee.
We have to vote it as the finance committee.
Well, this is our recommendation, so we
Good
have to
point.
Oh, yeah,
revise
the
this
guidelines committee can make a recommendation
recommendation,
tonight.
so we can vote for a recommendation.
Okay.
Okay, what's the recommendation?
Shall I restate
Yes.
the motion? So I move that we resolve to set a sustainable growth rate stretching prospectively over 5 years, which is based upon the most recent, which will be set on as of July 1st, and will be based upon the most recent 12 months of the regional CPI, will be based upon the arithmetic average of the most recent 12-month CPI and the 10-year T-bill yield on or about the first trading day in July.
I think we've
Given up on the
He's,
5-year rolling average.
Dick's point trumped that. So we're back to 1 year.
1 year
And it's very
CPI.
simple. People can understand it. CPI and 10-year bill.
So it's the most recent CPI, and going forward, 10-year Treasury.
10-year Treasury yield.
I think there's going to be issues with that, using 1 year's worth of numbers to project out 5 years into the future.
Say
I
that
think you're going to have to use some kind of a rolling average for at least the 10-year.
I'm not catching what you're saying, Grace.
Well, the 10-year is, if it's forward-looking, it's been forward-looking for the past 10 years, which means you could take a rolling average for the past 5 years, because that looks forward at least 5 years, right?
Just take the current one.
So the rates 5 years ago would be 5 years into our future. So the rolling average of the 10-year.
Too complicated. It's too complex.
Getting
You
complicated.
think that's complex? I don't think it is when it comes to
And
the
you'd run into,
treasury.
and you'd run
no, we
into
have
the
to explain
same,
that.
you'd run
We have
into
to
the same
explain to
problem that you have with the CPI, that if you went back 5 years on a 10-year Treasury, that rate is artificially low. It just has, just because of the crisis, just because of the collapse in the financial
The
system.
fluctuation in the yield is,
Seems to me it'd be a good place to start. Anyway, and get this thing moving, because we've been talking about it for a long time.
I'm sorry, Tom, can you say it one more time?
I don't think I can, Mary.
So, how about if I say it? It's the average of the CPI and the 10-year T-bill
For what period of time?
for 12 months for the CPI and whatever the current T-bill is on July 1st.
Well,
The yield on the
The
10-year.
yield.
Okay, so you left out some details, which are, we're going to set this, we're going to set this
Because we're just
as of
doing a
July
tentative.
1. And we're going to use the
Recommendation.
12-month CPI for the most recent 12-month period.
Yes.
And the current
And
treasury yield as of
to build up, now I'm getting confused, to build up the arithmetic average of the 12-month, for the CPI for the most recent 12 months period and the 10-year T-bill as of the first trading day in July.
Perfect. Yield.
Anita, do you have that? Good. You've heard it about 6 times.
I call the question.
Yes.
So what do you have,
You're
Anita?
the chair.
She'll get it. She'll
She
get
got
it.
it?
Yeah.
It's gonna be like our little problem.
Yes, I seconded, and, no, it was Tom's motion.
Okay.
Okay,
Second.
and is there any further discussion? No, I'm ready to call for a vote. I don't hear any further discussion on this.
It's a recommendation. It's a recommendation.
It's a recommendation to the full Finance Committee, which we will take up on Thursday night. All of those in favor? It's unanimous.
Cool.
I love it when that happens.
All right.
Now,
Seeing that it's
I-
10 o'clock, do
I have
we
one
have
more,
any
I have one
further
more,
business?
I have one more related item. And it relates to something
Is it on the agenda?
that Richard, you mentioned that it would be worthwhile instructing or asking or strongly recommending to the entities that are engaged in collective bargaining that cost of living increases be limited to CPI.
Yeah. And they'll come up with all kinds of ifs, ands, or buts, but it's, I think if you use the current CPI, you'd have to be hard-pressed to argue that my cost of living should be greater, my increase in cost of living should be greater than the increase, the actual increase in cost of living. Right?
So I'm making a motion that we similarly recommend to the Finance Committee at large that it issue such a strong recommendation
Yes.
to the
The-
budgeting entities.
I think that will be extremely hard resisted. That will be resisted by all of these budgeting entities to
Yes,
the point where they will fight even our setting the sustainable growth rate.
Well, their argument is going to be that the contracts are prospective. You have to look into the future. You're going to limit the cost of living to what it is today, and 3 years from now, it might be twice that.
Well, that wouldn't be, that wasn't the intention I had in mind. I was figuring that, don't they do it on a yearly basis? Don't they make cost of living increases?
I don't think so.
The contract will set out what it will be for each of the next 3 years. But it's not to say that you couldn't have a
Yeah.
contract that
It
said
should
the
be.
COLA
It
will
should be,
be
but I'm not
what
sure
the
that it is.
CPI was on a certain date.
Yeah.
And that's what the contract says, is that it is as defined as a moving target on a measurement date, as opposed to picking a number.
Right.
The school committees, the
Yeah.
school committee and
I think
and
right
the
now, the
select
way
board are
it's
gonna
done is
resist
that
this.
they-
They're gonna say,
Well, they should be really
They
happy
basically
because then they're
forecast
gonna
and say it's going to be.
absolutely, they will.
4.5.
Why do you think they're going to be?
Because they want the freedom to negotiate. This is part of, like any big negotiation, there's balancing the cost of living increases versus steps and all that stuff, and they're gonna say, you're gonna tie my hands to the
Well,
cost
we're
of
actually
living?
telling them what the total budget growth can be.
Okay,
So they're gonna
I-
have to be, like, there's a whole come to higher power about this whole, the salary wedge can't be growing faster than these other numbers.
Isn't
I
it just a
know.
recommendation?
And so-
We have, we're not, we can't
The
enforce
COLA,
this.
no, we can't, that's the basic issues, we
It's a
can't afford this.
recommendation.
And if they say, look, my whole salary pie can't grow more than 4%, let's divide it up between steps, lanes, and COLAs, and it all has to work to, that it all grows by this much, then that helps us get closer to narrowing that gap and this being livable as opposed to this world wherein you can get 10% raises for the first 16 years of your work life.
I think we'll have to, when we bring this forth and so on, we will have to kind of attach a pretty well thought out explanation, some of the thoughts that we've been talking about, you know, relating it to the excess levy limit and you know, all these other things that, the economic diversity in the town, you know, what happens with, when our employees, the town employees can't afford to live in town, that sort of stuff. Yeah. You'll understand that.
So, I don't think I heard a second to my motion.
No, Phil did.
No, I didn't.
Oh, no.
I'm
certainly
I'm
did not.
against it. I'm advocating against this, against this second idea.
Then I will second.
That's the job of the
Wait,
board.
your motion is to have a recommendation?
Is that we, as a finance committee,
Yep.
well, actually, it's the guidelines, as the guidelines committee
Then resist both.
will recommend to the finance committee that the finance committee give the news to the budgeting entities that it would be favorable to use CPI as a cost of living component of a contract negotiation,
So I just want to
rather
be clear,
than a
so
fixed.
it's a recommendation to them, it's not.
I don't really know.
It's a signal,
that-
it's not really.
It's not my, we're in discussion mode.
No.
Exactly.
Okay, we're in discussion mode now,
That's-
but it's
yeah.
not my, I would
No, I
not be
think
in
that we
favor
could
of
just
this
tell them that we
proposal.
have this proxy for
Why
our
not?
budget growth.
Why not, Dean?
I feel that the budgeting entities have to have some independence in their conversations, and they can set their contract negotiations how they want, and if we give them a target for the overall size of what it has to be, it's probably easier actually for them to come to that number if all the pieces in the contract are fixed, rather than some wild card that's
Yeah.
just in there.
I see your point.
So that, you know, that's just my 2 cents, and I'm not really in favor of us telling them how to negotiate this.
Agreed.
We're sort of saying, keep a lid on it, because we have this guardrail.
Yeah.
And you figure out how to do it.
Right, okay.
Since Peter's had to do this, I'd like to hear his input.
Yeah,
What do you think, Peter? What would have been helpful to you?
I would have taken any kind of guidance as helpful, help me negotiate.
Right.
Because
Yeah, but
it's really hard. And you're looking, obviously, the school committee is gonna be looking for ways to keep the costs under control, and the teachers are gonna find every reason under the sun why they need more. So, with that said, I do think the idea of just a total number, let the school committee work it out.
Sure.
All right.
Okay.
and will be sufficient for them.
Well-
And it's certainly, we're way ahead of where we have been and becoming much more proactive than reactive, and it'll give them some, even this will give them some ammo to say, you know, we have got to keep a lid on this thing.
So in the face of this overwhelming support, I withdraw the motion.
All right, seeing how it's 10 o'clock, we do have committee questions, comments on other items. Do we have any other items that anyone wants to comment on? Tom seems to
I've
have
exhausted myself.
enjoyed that element of the agenda. I don't hear any more. Are there any comments from the public? Just a shake of the head, so. Sure.
A brief reminder that there are other people who are not in this room who are very interested in what you're doing and the wonderful progress that you're making on behalf of the town, who actually count on you being audible by speaking into the microphones. So just a reminder that if you would do that, that people will really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Murray.
Thanks.
Speaking of that, mine seems to have gotten itself off, so that's probably.
Mine off.
Good.
Yeah.
Can't turn it off.
Motion to adjourn?
On motion to, all in favor?
Question asked.
All right, we're out of here.
Oh, my.